Chapter 98. The sun rose from the east and shone warm sunlight on the sky pillar peak. Early in the morning, when Ji Tianqing walked out of his room, he saw that there were already a few disciples in the courtyard. Some were reading the 1,000 medicine collection under the gazebo or under the tree, while others were practicing their sword techniques in the courtyard. There were also some who were sitting on the roof in a meditative posture, breathing and cultivating the essence energy of heaven and earth. Seeing this scene, Ji Tianqing couldn't help but smile playfully. After all, they're all young people who are the top geniuses of the various nations. They all have different personalities and some strange hobbies. Yesterday, everyone just joined the sect and was still rather reserved. Now that they've settled down and understood the rules of the sect, they've all become more relaxed. He muttered a few words in his heart and walked out of the wind cloud courtyard with the 1,000 medicine collection, heading to the spiritual herbal garden at the back of the mountain. It was a full 5 kilometers from the wind cloud courtyard to the spiritual herbal garden at the back of the mountain, and there were tree-lined paths along the way. Ji Tianqing walked on the tree-lined path and would occasionally encounter some outer or inner sect disciples. The disciples walked in groups of 2s and 3s, discussing the essence of martial arts, the mysteries of pills, and so on. When he passed by a combat arena at the back of the mountain, he saw 2 inner sect disciples of the mystic mastery realm sparring on the stage. Even without using weapons, the fight was very exciting. There was a circle of disciples around the combat arena who were all watching the sparring. From time to time, some of them would discuss a few words, seemingly having comprehended some tricks. Although Ji Tianqing had only joined the sect for 2 days, he could feel the strong learning and competitive atmosphere in the sect through what he had seen and heard in the past 2 days. After all, the young elites of the 10 nations were gathered in the Sky Pillar sect where there were many geniuses and powerhouses. Everyone wanted to fly to the 9 heavens and become a martial arts powerhouse that everyone respected. Who would be willing to crawl in the mud and be humiliated and looked down upon by others? The entrance of the spiritual herbal garden was not only protected by an array formation, but there were also 8 inner sect disciples of the mystic mastery realm guarding it. Ji Tianqing walked to the gate and showed his identity token before being allowed to enter. He carried the 1,000 medicine collection and crossed the gate. As soon as he entered the spiritual herbal garden, he smelled the fragrance of various plants, flowers, and fruits. There were all kinds of flowers, fruits, and trees planted all over the mountains. They were all spiritual herbs and miraculous herbs. Usually, there were disciples in charge of taking care of the spiritual herbal garden, and the various herbs in the garden were planted according to their categories. There was a 2-meter-tall stone tablet erected at the edge of each nursery and there were names of various medicinal herbs. Medicinal collection and medicinal herbs 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 and would stop and observe them for a long time. Medicinal herbs and the herbs and medicinal herbs and the herbs and the herbs of the mystic realm. Of the mystic medicines mystic heavens and the my mystic realm was mystic myung was mystic stick pillar mystic garden mystic realm my mystic realm, mystic my mystic realm, mystic and mystic garden, mystic of the mystic garden my mystic. The mission that Deacon Han gave us was to memorize more than 3,000 types of medicinal herbs within a week, and to be able to tell the characteristics and effects of each medicinal herb. At my current speed, I can only identify 600 herbs a day. In a week, I can barely identify 3,000 herbs, but I might not be able to remember all of them. Thinking of this, Ji Tianqing frowned and was a little worried. He closed the 1,000 medicine collection and prepared to find a place to sit down and rest for a while. He sized up his surroundings a few times before realizing that he had unknowingly arrived at the depths of the medicinal garden. He was currently at the side of a jade lake surrounded by willows. The surface of the lake was wide, and the clear, dark green water rippled as a cool breeze blew. The lakeside was filled with tall, green willow trees. Thousands of green willow branches hung down and swayed gently with the breeze, like the slender hands of a young girl, gently fiddling with the lake water. Such a delightful scene made Ji Tianqing's mood much better, and his mind much more relaxed. He carried the 1,000 medicine collection to the lakeside, and was about to sit down on a stone bench under a willow tree to rest. At this time, he suddenly saw a young girl in a green dress standing under the willow tree next to him. The young girl's back was graceful, and her green dress fluttered gently with the breeze. She looked particularly pure and beautiful. Even if he couldn't see the young girl's face, Ji Tianqing could guess that she must be a gentle beauty just by looking at her slim back. The young girl was staring at the lake, as if she was thinking or remembering something. Suddenly, she heard Ji Tianqing's footsteps. She came back to her senses and turned to look at Ji Tianqing. Ji Tianqing and her eyes met. He immediately saw her face, and couldn't help but feel a little surprised. Just as he had imagined, the young girl in the green dress had a pure and beautiful face, and her white and translucent skin was sparkling and translucent like jade. Under the neat bangs covering her forehead, there was a pair of willow leaf eyebrows, and a pair of big watery eyes, which were as clear as the lake water. Her appearance was extremely beautiful, but she was not cold and arrogant. Instead, she was very gentle and demure, and had a kind of delicate temperament. Ji Tianqing didn't know why, but the young girl in the green dress made him feel a sense of closeness from the bottom of his heart, and he also had a desire to protect her. She was not as cold and arrogant as Yun Yao, who was otherworldly and could only be seen from afar. After Ji Tianqing came back to his senses, he bowed to the young girl in the green dress and said apologetically, "I'm sorry, I'm just passing by and want to sit down and rest for a while. If I've disturbed you, please forgive me, Junior sister." When it came to addressing her, he hesitated. The young girl in the green dress was neither a green-robed outer disciple, nor a white-robed inner disciple, which made it difficult for Ji Tianqing to distinguish her identity. Seeing that she was young, he could only call her junior sister. The young girl in the green dress nodded slightly and showed a touch of a smile. She was very gentle. "It's okay, I'm just here to relax. It's not disturbing." After that, she glanced at the 1,000 medicine collection in Ji Tianqing's hand, and asked with a smile, "Are you an outer disciple who came to the medicine garden to learn to identify herbs?" Ji Tianqing nodded and answered truthfully, "My name is Ji Tianqing, and I'm a new disciple who just entered the sect. I'm taught by Deacon Han, and I'm here to learn the way of alchemy." The two chatted under the willow tree and exchanged names. The young girl in the green dress was called Xian. She claimed that everyone usually called her junior sister, so Ji Tianqing changed the way he addressed her as junior sister Xian. Xian did not reveal her identity, and also tacitly agreed to this name. Through the conversation, Ji Tianqing learned that Xian used to learn alchemy under Han Xiaosheng's tutelage. In order to memorize the herbs in the 1,000 medicine collection, she also came to the medicine garden to learn every day. Later, she came to the medicine garden many times, and liked this place with pleasant scenery. She often came to the lake to relax or stare blankly. It was unknown whether it was Xian's personality or some other reason, but she seemed to have a sense of closeness with Ji Tianqing. After the two chatted for a while, she actually took the initiative to help Ji Tianqing learn to identify herbs. After all, she could recite the 1,000 medicine collection backwards, and she knew the thousands of herbs in the medicine garden like the back of her hand. She could casually mention the characteristics and effects of any herb. Chapter 99. Since Xian was willing to help him, how could Ji Tianqing refuse? After he bowed and thanked Xian, he followed her around the herb garden and listened to her introduce each and every herb. This dark purple herb is called the purple heart bamboo and is a rare spiritual herb. It needs to grow for 9 years before it can be used to refine pills. It can be used to refine various types of profound pills that can calm the mind. This blue herb is called the ice moon flower and only blooms on the night of the full moon. It is mainly used to refine the ice moon profound pill and can increase one's cultivation. Xian introduced the various herbs as she walked and suddenly saw Ji Tianqing close to a beautiful spiritual flower, and she hurriedly reminded him. Tianqing, don't touch that bone-dissolving grass. It looks beautiful but it actually contains poison. If you touch it, it will corrode your flesh and bones. Hearing her gentle voice, Ji Tianqing hurriedly retracted his hand and gave her a grateful smile. Xian continued, actually, there are over 3,000 herbs in this herb garden and many of them are poisonous. Some even contain poison. When you are identifying the herbs in the herb garden, you must not casually touch those herbs. If you are not careful, you will be poisoned and injured. Ji Tianqing nodded his head and memorized every word she said. The two of them walked around the herb garden for an entire afternoon, and with Xian's help, Ji Tianqing memorized over 1,000 herbs. The two of them chatted as they walked and their relationship became closer and closer, and they had already become friends. When evening came, Xian wanted to return to her residence and the two of them left the herb garden together. At the entrance of the herb garden, Xian smiled and waved her slender little hand as she bid farewell to Ji Tianqing. Ji Tianqing stood on the tree-lined path and watched her figure disappear into the distance. A gentle smile appeared on his face. It's really strange. I have only known Xian for half a day and I have already hit it off with her. Seeing her leave, I still feel reluctant. How could this be? He muttered in his heart as he could not understand. Although Xian was extremely beautiful and had a gentle and graceful personality, he was not someone who was greedy for beauty and did not have any improper thoughts towards Xian. The hazy feeling he had for Xian was more like an older brother wanting to protect his younger sister. At the same time, he had some doubts in his heart and was secretly guessing Xian's identity. Although Xian did not reveal her identity, he could tell that Xian's strength was not ordinary. She was definitely not an outer sanctum disciple, and was most likely an inner sanctum disciple. As for the inner disciples, they had to wear white robes, which was their identity. Unless it was someone with a special identity, one must not wear clothes of different colors. Therefore, Ji Tianqing dared to conclude that Xian was most likely an inner sect disciple with a special identity. Forget it. Let's not think about so much nonsense. Junior sister Xian and I hit it off well, and I just want to be friends with her. Why should I investigate her identity? After letting his imagination run wild for a while, Ji Tianqing collected his thoughts and followed the tree-lined path back to the storm courtyard. After he returned to his residence, the odd-job worker Xiaofan brought him dinner. The amount of dinner was the same as yesterday, but the dishes and meat soup had been changed. After Ji Tianqing finished his dinner, he sat in his room and closed his eyes to rest, preparing to cultivate after calming his heart. However, he sat there for half an hour, and Xian's figure and smiling face appeared in his mind from time to time, making it difficult for him to calm down. He had no choice but to sit in front of the desk by the window, holding the 1,000 medicine collection and carefully reading it, memorizing the contents. Unknowingly, 2 hours had passed. At this time, it was already the middle of the night, and the storm courtyard was silent. Ji Tianqing was engrossed in reading the book when he suddenly frowned and subconsciously raised his head to look outside the window. His 5 senses were very sharp, and he faintly felt as if there was a pair of eyes secretly watching him. The feeling of being secretly watched made his heart uneasy, making it difficult for him to calm down. He quickly put down the 1,000 medicine collection and reached out to open the window. Swish! In the dark night outside the window, on the roof not far from him, there was a black shadow flashing. Sure enough, there is someone secretly watching. Ji Tianqing suddenly frowned, and a cold light flashed in his eyes. He immediately grabbed the black dragon sword at the head of the bed, jumped out of the window, and ran in the direction of the black shadow. The black shadow waved his hand and shot a cold light at him, and the figure immediately disappeared into the darkness. Whoosh! The cold light made a sharp sound and went straight for Ji Tianqing's face, bringing with it a fierce energy. Ji Tianqing immediately waved his sword to block, and with a ding sound, he blocked the cold light and sent it flying to the ground. At this time, he clearly saw that the cold light was a hidden weapon flying knife. Damn it! You want to sneak attack me? Ji Tianqing secretly cursed, and his heart was full of doubts. He ran out with all his strength, wanting to catch the black shadow and see who wanted to sneak attack him. However, when he chased out of the storm courtyard, he found that the black shadow had disappeared into the forest. Ji Tianqing was unwilling to give up, and he chased into the forest with the black dragon sword, looking around with a sharp gaze. However, after searching for a while, he couldn't find any trace of the black shadow, and could only return without success. After returning to his room, he sat on the edge of the bed and pondered with a frown. That person was secretly spying on me, and after I discovered him, he used a hidden weapon to sneak attack me. However, he didn't dare to make a move in the storm courtyard. Clearly, he didn't want to reveal his whereabouts and identity. In that case, this person must be from the Sky Pillar sect, and he is much stronger than me. It is very likely that he is a Tongxian realm expert. But I just arrived at the Sky Pillar sect, and I haven't made any enemies. Who wants to deal with me? Ji Tianqing pondered and analyzed for a long time, but he didn't have a clue. After a quarter of an hour, he calmed down and entered the secret room to cultivate. Yesterday, when he entered the sect, Deacon Du Wu gave each person a book of the green pine art. This was the Sky Pillar sect's entry cultivation technique. Ji Tianqing had studied this cultivation technique and found that it was only a high-grade origin-level cultivation technique. Although this cultivation technique had been passed down by the Sky Pillar sect for 1,000 years and had been tempered thousands of times, it was already very perfect. If he cultivated this cultivation technique, his martial foundation would be incomparably solid. However, after Ji Tianqing read it, he threw the green pine art aside and had no plans to cultivate it. To him, the path of the sword heart was the most suitable and the most wonderful cultivation technique. He made up his mind to cultivate the third level of the path of the sword heart and strive to reach the Tongxian realm within half a year. The next morning, Ji Tianqing finished cultivating and walked out of the secret room. He had just finished washing up and was about to go to the spirit herb garden to find Xian when he walked out of the room with the 1,000 medicine collection. At that moment, the bell rang in the conference hall. Ji Tianqing stopped and hurriedly rushed to the conference hall with the disciples in the courtyard. After everyone gathered in the conference hall, they saw 3 black-robed deacons standing in the hall. 2 of them were Han Xiaofan and Du Wu. As for the other middle-aged deacon, Ji Tianqing did not recognize him. The unfamiliar deacon's face was a little gloomy, and his eyes were filled with anger as he looked at Ji Tianqing and the others. Everyone felt that the atmosphere was not right, so they stood in the conference hall with a solemn expression and did not dare to make a sound. Han Xiaofeng's gaze swept across everyone and he said in a low and serious tone, "The day before yesterday, when I asked you to learn how to identify medicinal herbs, I said that you could enter the spirit herb garden, but you must not pluck a single flower or fruit from the garden. Yesterday, apart from Shi Jingsheng and Emo, the other 8 of you entered the spirit herb garden. However, someone violated the sect rules and plucked a white sun fruit without permission. Deacon Mu, who is in charge of the spirit herb garden, is here. If any of you secretly plucked the white sun fruit, stand up and admit your guilt now." Only then did everyone understand what was going on. They looked at the people around them with a puzzled expression, secretly guessing who would steal the herb. Deacon Mu also shouted with a gloomy face, "The white sun fruit is a precious spirit herb. It only blooms once every 10 years and bears fruit once every 20 years. As disciples of the Fengyun Hall, someone actually plucked the white sun fruit without permission. This is a disgrace to the Fengyun Hall. I'll give you a chance. Whoever plucked the white sun fruit, stand up and admit your guilt. I can give you a lighter punishment. Otherwise, when I find you, you will be severely punished. All the disciples looked at each other and whispered in each other's ears, but no one stood up and admitted their guilt. Ji Tianqing was also puzzled, but he looked on quietly as usual. Seeing that no one took the initiative to admit their guilt, Han Xiaosheng ordered, Deacon Du, accompany Deacon Mu to search the rooms of the 8 disciples. Duwu nodded and left the conference hall with Deacon Mu to search the rooms. It's a new week. Looking for recommendation tickets and rewards, please brothers. Chapter 100. The atmosphere in the hall was very stifling. Han Xiaosheng sat at the head of the table with lowered eyelids, his face full of anger. All the disciples were inexplicably nervous, quietly waiting for the result. Only Shi Jingsheng and Emo, who were proficient in Pill Dao, had not been to the Spirit Herb Garden yesterday. Therefore, the two of them were relaxed, without any psychological burden. The two of them sized up Ji Tianqing, Nie Hao, and the other disciples. Their eyes were filled with disdain. After a quarter of an hour, Du Wu and Deacon Mu returned to the hall. In Deacon Mu's hand was a white spirit fruit with a hint of red. It was the white sun fruit. Du Wu glanced at Ji Tianqing, then walked to Han Xiaosheng's side and whispered a few words. Seeing this scene, Ji Tianqing's heart could not help but thump, faintly having a bad premonition. Sure enough, Han Xiaosheng also showed a surprised expression, glancing at Ji Tianqing. Ji Tianqing. As a disciple of the Wind Cloud Hall, you disregarded the rules of the sect and privately picked the white sun fruit. Do you know your crime? Han Xiaosheng's face was solemn, his tone cold as he asked. Ji Tianqing's face immediately changed, his tone firm as he said, Deacon Han. Although the white sun fruit is precious, this disciple does not have the slightest bit of greed, let alone secretly pick it. There must be a misunderstanding, or there must be some other hidden story. I ask Deacon Han to investigate. Han Xiaosheng's face was still cold, his tone low as he shouted, Ji Tianqing. If you did not secretly pick the spirit herb, how could this white sun fruit appear in your room? Ji Tianqing only felt baffled, immediately opening his mouth to explain, Deacon Han, this is impossible. Someone must be framing me. Han Xiaosheng frowned, shouting in a low voice, stop quibbling. There are witnesses and material evidence, how can you evade? Since you just entered the sect and this is your first offense, I punish you to sweep the floor of the Grand Peace Palace for a month. Ji Tianqing immediately secretly clenched his teeth, his fists in his sleeves creaking. He knew that he was being framed, but he couldn't defend himself. He was punished by Han Xiaosheng to sweep the floor, but being ridiculed by others was secondary. More importantly, he was punished to sweep the floor for a month. This would delay his cultivation for a month. Anger surged in his chest, but he could only suppress it. He maintained a calm expression and said, Disciple, obeys. After cupping his hands in greeting, he turned around and walked out of the hall. He left the storm courtyard and headed towards the Great Peace Palace to sweep the floor. Even though he was filled with humiliation, he knew that a lack of forbearance in small matters would spoil great plans. He absolutely could not be rash and impulsive. After Ji Tianqing left, Deacon Mu also took the white sun fruit and left. Han Xiaosheng reprimanded the disciples again before leaving the hall with Du Wu. After the deacons left, the few disciples who had been holding back their laughter finally began to chuckle and discuss. Hee, that Ji Tianqing is actually so stupid. He dared to violate the rules when he just entered the sect. His future is bleak. Hee, that kid was punished to sweep the floor for a month. Where would he have time to learn alchemy? In my opinion, in the alchemy assessment a month later, he will definitely be at the bottom. Shi Jingsheng curled his lips and said with a face full of disdain, Ji Tianqing, that guy is still number 1 in the Azure Sky Kingdom's grand competition. He actually wants to steal a white sun fruit. He really hasn't seen the world. Emo revealed a mocking sneer. Hee, after all, he came from a rundown small country like the Azure Sky Kingdom. He looks like a poor and greedy person. It's normal for him to steal things. When these words came out, Ji Ling and Nia Hao's expressions changed. Originally, when Ji Ling saw Ji Tianqing being punished in public, he was secretly sneering and gloating over his misfortune. Suddenly hearing Shi Jingcheng and Emo's words, he also lost face. After all, these two people ridiculed the Azure Sky Kingdom as a rundown small country. He also came from the Azure Sky Kingdom and was even a prince of that country. Of course, he was also insulted. But Ji Ling only frowned and didn't have the intention to refute. Obviously, he was going to swallow his anger. But Nia Hao stepped forward and coldly glared at Shi Jingcheng and Emo. He said in a cold tone, "Shi Jingcheng, Emo, you two are singing the same tune to slander Ji Tianqing and criticize others behind their backs. Aren't you too petty? We are all disciples of the Wind Cloud Courtyard. Don't you feel ashamed to ridicule your fellow disciples?" Nia Hao was born in a family of generals and was also the descendant of Marshal Qian Kun. Since young, he was raised to be hot-blooded, upright, and kind. In addition, he had dealt with Ji Tianqing before. The two of them were friends. At this time, of course, he would fight for his friend. Shi Jingcheng and Emo were complacent when they were suddenly scolded by Nia Hao. Their faces sank and they angrily glared at Nia Hao. "Hee, we are talking about Ji Tianqing. What does it have to do with you, Nia Hao? Besides, we don't want to be senior brothers with dirty hands like Ji Tianqing, who is a scoundrel who steals chickens and dogs." "That's right. Nia Hao, you are defending Ji Tianqing. Are you with him?" Nia Hao angrily glared at them and firmly shouted, "Brother Ji and I are friends. I know his character very well. He would never do such a thing. I believe he has been wronged." Shi Jingcheng and Emo were even more complacent and laughed contemptuously. "Ha, this is really funny." The two deacons found the white sun fruit in his room. The facts are all there. You still want to help him quibble? Snakes and rats really belong to the same nest. Birds of a feather flock together. Forget it. Let's not lower ourselves to Nia Hao's level. In the future, we should stay away from him and Ji Tianqing. The two of them talked for a while and left with a sneer on their faces. The other disciples looked on coldly as if this matter had nothing to do with them. Nia Hao coldly snorted and didn't say anything. He had already seen that most of these disciples were selfish and didn't want to be friends with anyone. In his heart, only Ji Tianqing was worthy of trust and could be a good friend. But he couldn't help but have some doubts and sighed, Brother Ji, you just entered the sect. Who did you offend to be framed?" In an antique study room, Han Xiaofan was sitting at the table flipping through books and dealing with sect matters. Duwu stood at the side and hesitated for a moment before asking, "Brother Han, today's matter, you and I both know that Ji Tianqing was framed. Why do you still want to punish him?" Han Xiaofan put down the book and his bronze face revealed a smile as he said, "Previously, I was in charge of the Imperial Azure Kingdom's entrance examination and tournament. So I am not unfamiliar with Ji Tianqing. At first, this child was unconscious and carried to participate in the examination. He only had the strength of the third level of the body refinement realm. In the end, he became a joke to the people. A month later, this kid recovered to the true element realm and passed through the illusory armament mystic formation. He obtained a spot in the tournament and won first place in the tournament. I personally supervised the tournament and saw the scene of this kid winning first place. He is definitely a martial arts genius that is hard to come by in 100 years. If he is carefully nurtured, his future will be limitless." Hearing these words, Duwu was even more puzzled and asked, "Brother Han, since that is the case, why do you still want to punish him?" Han Xiaosheng's smile was somewhat playful as he explained, a flower that doesn't go through wind and frost will always be delicate. A baby eagle that is protected by its mother eagle will never be able to spread its wings and soar. Martial arts cultivation is the same. No expert will have a smooth journey. They will all experience bumpy tribulations. This time, I punished Ji Tianqing as a small punishment. I hope this kid will learn to be smarter in the future and not be unaware of being plotted against. The Sky Pillar sect is not a good place. If one only has martial arts talent but no brains, they will not be able to grow into an expert. Moreover, the reason why I punished him to sweep the floor of the Grand Peace Palace was for another reason. Could it be that you have forgotten that there is an old man who has not taken half a step out of the Grand Peace Palace for 20 years? Hearing the words, old man, Duwu suddenly came to a realization. His eyes revealed a deep smile. I almost forgot about this. It seems that Brother Han has really put a lot of thought into this kid. However, whether or not he can obtain an opportunity in the Grand Peace Palace will depend on his own fortune. Chapter 101. Ji Tianqing followed the tree-lined path and walked more than 20 li before he found Greaton Palace. This palace was too remote. It was not on towering Sky Peak, but in a mountain behind towering Sky Peak. Greaton Palace was surrounded by lush forests. The forests were filled with tall trees with lush leaves. If one did not follow the limestone path to the peak of the mountain, it would be very difficult to see Greaton Palace. When Ji Tianqing came to the gates of Greaton Palace, he was stopped by a middle-aged man who was as tall as an iron tower. This middle-aged man's eyes were fierce. His face was covered in scars from blades and swords. He looked especially vicious and murderous. It was not an exaggeration to say that this middle-aged man could stop young children from crying at night. Young children would cry at a glance. But strangely, the middle-aged man was mute. Ji Tianqing showed his identity token to him and said that he had been punished to sweep the floor. After explaining for a long time, he was allowed to enter. After entering Greaton Palace, he walked in the ancient courtyards and silently examined the surroundings. Greaton Palace was too large. It almost took up the entire peak of the mountain. It was more than twice the size of the Ji Mansion. There were 4 courtyards in the palace. There were at least 1,000 rooms. But they were all empty. It appeared cold and quiet. Other than the mute man guarding the gates, Ji Tianqing walked around Greaton Palace and did not see anyone else. Also, the paths in the palace were covered in dust and leaves. There were also weeds growing on the sides of the paths. The door frames and the eaves of many rooms were covered in spider webs. All of Greaton Palace was quiet and desolate. It had not been cleaned for a long time. Ji Tianqing spent an hour walking around Greaton Palace and basically understood the layout of the palace. Then he found a broom and a bamboo basket and started to clean Greaton Palace. He first started to clean the first courtyard, using the broom to sweep the dust and leaves on the path. 2 hours passed. It was noon, but Ji Tianqing had not even finished sweeping the first courtyard. He did not even eat lunch and continued to sweep the dust and leaves. It wasn't until the afternoon that he finally cleaned the road. However, he still had to clear the cobwebs on the door frames and eaves, clean the dusty rooms, and pull out the weeds in the yard. Thinking of this, Ji Tianqing felt tired. Cleaning the room was even more time-consuming, and he had to prepare tools such as a rag and a basin. Thinking of this, he decided not to clean the room. Instead, he entered the second courtyard and continued to clean the dust and fallen leaves on the road. Time passed quickly. Unknowingly, it was already evening, and the sun was about to set. Ji Tianqing looked at the bamboo basket that was as tall as a person. It was filled with dust and fallen leaves. However, he had only cleaned a small portion of the courtyard. If he wanted to clean the entire courtyard, he would have to work until late at night. The Great Peace Palace is so large, how long will it take me to finish cleaning the Great Peace Palace? Ji Tianqing felt a strong sense of powerlessness in his heart, and his mood became more and more angry and sullen. He simply threw the broom to the side and sat on the stone bench under the eaves of the corridor, wiping his sweat as he rested. Damn bastard! If I find out who framed me, I will ruthlessly take revenge on him. I entered the sky-bearing sect to cultivate the martial way, not to sweep the floor as an errand boy. If I delay for a month, I will fall behind the other disciples, damn it. The more Ji Tianqing thought about it, the angrier he became. His eyes burned with anger. At this time, the black dragon sword on his back suddenly moved twice. He frowned and asked in a low voice, "Little black dragon, what's wrong? Do you have something you want to say?" The little black dragon's voice came from the black dragon sword. It said in a low muffled voice, "Old Ji, if you keep cleaning like this, I'm afraid you won't be able to finish in half a month. I have a way to help you." Ji Tianqing raised his eyebrows and asked with a smile, "Oh? What method do you have?" "Watch me," the little black dragon said confidently. Then it flew out of the scabbard with a whoosh and flew to the center of the courtyard. It revealed its 3-meter-long flood dragon body and circled in the air above the courtyard, immediately stirring up a gust of wind. Ji Tianqing sat under the eaves of the corridor and watched with interest as it circled in the air. His face was filled with anticipation. Whoosh whoosh whoosh. As the little black dragon circled faster and faster, the gust of wind in the courtyard became more and more violent. Soon, the gust of wind became a hurricane. Ji Tianqing's eyes shone as he whispered, "This is a true hurricane." In the blink of an eye, the hurricane swept the dust and fallen leaves on the ground into the air. The entire courtyard was covered by the hurricane. Not only was the dust and fallen leaves on the ground, but even the weeds in the courtyard were uprooted and flew into the air to form a ball. Countless fallen leaves and weeds were mixed together, forming a ball the size of a room. The green and yellow ball was wrapped in the hurricane and constantly circled in the air. It looked very spectacular. Ji Tianqing was all smiles as he said in surprise, "This courtyard is full of fallen leaves and weeds. I'll need at least an entire day to clean it up. I didn't think that little black dragon would be able to clean up all the weeds and leaves in the blink of an eye. Truly inconceivable. The hurricane you created is truly a divine tool for cleaning." The little black dragon's voice came from the hurricane. It said with a smug tone, "Humph, of course. Although I'm very weak, a small matter like this can't stump me. Old Ji, just watch. I'll immediately help you clean up the courtyard." After saying this, the little black dragon's circling speed suddenly increased by 2 times. The hurricane's power also increased by 2 times, covering the entire courtyard and the room. The tiles on the roof could not withstand the huge pulling force and immediately flew into the sky with a walala sound. Not only that, but many of the herbs and trees planted around the courtyard were also affected by the hurricane. Countless herbs were uprooted and sent flying into the air like weeds. Those large trees were also swept up until they swayed violently. All of the leaves were swept away, flying into the hurricane. The dozen over large trees that were originally still lush with branches and leaves became barren in a blink of an eye. Not a single leaf was left. Ji Tianqing was instantly dumbfounded. After recovering his senses, he shouted with a face full of anxiety, "Little black dragon. Quickly stop. You used too much force and caused an accident." The little black dragon was currently flying with all its might. After hearing his shout, it then gradually slowed down its speed. But right at this time, at the courtyard's main entrance, an enraged roar of abuse suddenly sounded out. "Ah! My azure spirit tree! The azure soul grass that I nurtured with great care! Which damned bastard ruined this old man's many years of painstaking effort?" Suddenly hearing this voice, Ji Tianqing immediately quivered and subconsciously looked towards the courtyard's entrance. Only to see a white-bearded old man in purple robes currently standing at the courtyard's entrance, staring fixedly at those barren large trees. He was so angry that his beard flew up. Chapter 102. Ji Tianqing was stunned at that moment and cursed in his heart. He originally thought that there was no one in the Great Peace Palace, so he dared to let the little black dragon appear. However, the little black dragon had caused too much of a ruckus and alarmed the white-bearded old man. Although the old man was short and skinny, his skin was yellow and shriveled, like an old monkey with a white beard. However, he was wearing a purple robe, and his aura was unfathomably powerful. It was clear that he had an extremely noble status within the Sky Pillar sect. From the white-bearded old man's words, he seemed to be the master of Great Peace Palace. The dozen or so trees in the courtyard and the herbs in the nursery were all planted and cultivated by him. But now, the little black dragon had created a tornado and destroyed the old man's blood and sweat. It's over. Ji Tianqing's heart sank, and a bitter smile appeared on his face. At this moment, the tornado above the courtyard stopped abruptly and dissipated in an instant. The little black dragon instantly turned into the black dragon sword. With a whoosh, it burrowed into the scabbard on Ji Tianqing's back and no longer moved. The huge ball made of weeds, leaves, and tiles, which was the size of a house, lost the support of the tornado and fell into the yard with a plop. Suddenly, the entire courtyard was filled with dust and leaves, and the air was filled with chaos and filth. Ji Tianqing, who was standing under the eaves, was also showered with dust and leaves. He looked extremely disheveled. The white-bearded old man was even more miserable. He was almost buried by the leaves and tiles in the sky. Even though he was filled with rage as he circulated his internal energy, sending countless leaves and tiles flying. However, there were still a few pieces of fish that slipped through the net, in his white hair and beard. It looked very funny. However, Ji Tianqing couldn't bring himself to smile at all. This was because the white-bearded old man had his eyes on him and was rushing over with a face full of rage. Ah! You little bastard! Are you the one who ruined this old man's efforts? The white-bearded old man rushed in front of him in a flash and reached out to grab his collar. Ji Tianqing felt his collar tighten as the white-bearded old man lifted him up. Speak! Who are you? Why have you come to this old man's Great Peace Palace to make trouble? If you don't give this old man a reasonable explanation today. Bah! Even if you have a good reason, this old man will still beat you up. The white-bearded old man glared at him with red eyes. He looked like he was about to go berserk. Ji Tianqing wanted to dodge, but he couldn't. In front of the white-bearded old man, he was as weak as a chicken. Speak! The white-bearded old man grabbed him by the collar and pressed him against the wall. The back of his head hit the wall with a dull thud. Ji Tianqing felt dizzy. He waved his hands and explained, No, no, no. Senior, don't be rash. Please calm down. This has nothing to do with me. Even though he was trying to explain himself, his eyes were looking down at his feet. He thought to himself, I'm much taller than this old man, but he actually lifted me off the ground. How did he do it? Has nothing to do with you? The white-bearded old man glared again. He pointed at his nose and scolded, You little bastard. Other than you, there is no one else here. If you didn't do it, who else could it be? It's little. Ji Tianqing almost said it was the little black dragon that did it, but he stopped in time. After a moment of silence, he squeezed out a smile at the old man. He said with an apologetic smile, All right, I did it. Seeing the white-bearded old man glare and raise his fist to hit him, he hurriedly explained, Elder, I didn't do it on purpose. I am a new disciple of Wind Cloud Yard. I was framed by someone and was punished to clean Great Peace Palace. I just wanted to help you clean the yard, I didn't think." The white-bearded old man grinned and said, "Very good. It's good that you admit your crimes." Humph. These juniors are becoming more and more outrageous. They dare to come to Great Peace Palace to harass this old man. Little bastard, you are messing with the lion's head and pulling the teeth from the tiger's mouth. Finishing, his hand shook and he threw Ji Tianqing into the yard like he was throwing a little chick. Ji Tianqing flew into the air. He drew an arc in the air and fell towards the center of the yard. But before he landed on the ground, the white-bearded old man flew into the air like an arrow and punched him in the waist. Pang! Ji Tianqing's face twisted from the hit and his body broke out in a cold sweat. The white-bearded old man's attack was too tricky. It caused him to feel a piercing pain, but it didn't hurt his internal organs. He fell to the ground with a pudong sound, causing leaves and dust to fly everywhere. Little bastard. This old man needs to throw 360 punches today to vent my anger. Stand properly for this old man. Without waiting for him to stand up, the white-bearded old man fell from the sky again. He gave a loud shout and threw a punch. Throw 360 punches. Then won't I be beaten into a sesame seed cake? Ji Tianqing immediately leaped up from the ground, bursting out with all the potential he had in his life and leaped 10 meters away. Pang! The white-bearded old man fell from the sky and punched the blue stone ground. He created a 3-meter-wide crater in the ground and countless dust and stone fragments flew out. Ji Tianqing's heart jumped when he saw this. He did not hesitate to pull out the black dragon sword. With the black dragon sword in hand, he gained some confidence. He calmly said to the white-bearded old man, "Senior, this matter was my fault first. This junior apologizes to you. But this junior did not purposely destroy it. It was a misunderstanding. Please allow this junior to explain." "Explain my ass." The white-bearded old man fiercely glared at him and angrily scolded, "Junior, you are too impudent. You dare to draw your sword at this old man. You are really ignorant and laughable. Little bastard, if you do something wrong, you must admit it. If you are beaten, you must stand upright. Remember this." As soon as he finished speaking, the old man turned into a dark green gust of wind and immediately rushed to Ji Tianqing. He threw a punch at a certain part of his waist. "Senior, I'm sorry." Ji Tianqing had been punished to sweep the floor. He was already full of anger. Now that the white-bearded old man was unwilling to give up, he could only wave his sword and fight back. 10 Mysterious Swordplay. He waved the black dragon sword and used the 10 mysterious swordplay that was passed down in his family. This was his best sword technique. Swish, swish, swish. 3 dazzling sword lights slashed out and enveloped the white-bearded old man's body, forcing him to retreat. However, the white-bearded old man completely ignored the 3 sword lights. He broke through the sword lights in an instant and rushed to the front of him. The white-bearded old man gently flicked the black dragon sword away with his left index finger. His right hand punched the waist of the white-bearded old man and sent him flying again. Plop! Ji Tianqing fell in the middle of the courtyard. He was lying on the ground with a pale face. He bent over like a shrimp and could not get up for a while. The white-bearded old man attacked the part of his waist that made his nerves twitch in pain. However, it did not hurt his internal organs. Chapter 103. Little bastard, this is only the second punch. Don't play dead on the ground. Get up quickly. The white-bearded old man walked in front of Ji Tianqing and looked down at him. Ji Tianqing was filled with anger. He endured the pain and stood up, staring at the white-bearded old man. "Senior, are you really going to kill me?" The white-bearded old man grinned and said with disdain, "Are all the younger generation disciples so weak now? You only took 2 punches. You won't be hurt or die. Besides, you've fallen into my hands. Even if you want to die, you'll have to get my permission first." After saying that, he shouted coldly and punched Ji Tianqing again. Ji Tianqing was really angry this time. Since the black dragon sword was knocked away, he used his trump card and activated the 6 flashes of sword chi. Swish swish swish. 6 flashes of dark golden sword chi flew out from his palm and circled around him. They immediately split into 12 flashes of sword chi and formed a sword-light net. Swish 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 swish. Once the sword-light net was formed, there were hundreds and thousands of golden flashes that crisscrossed and intertwined, covering a 3-meter radius. The white-bearded old man's fist was about to hit Ji Tianqing, but it was blocked by the sword-light net. A few flashes of sword chi pierced his fist and made a crisp ding-ding-ding sound, as if they were piercing steel. The white-bearded old man quickly withdrew his fist. A look of surprise flashed across his eyes as he looked at the sword-light net with interest. "Oh, I didn't expect you to be so capable. This kind of sword-light net, I seem to have heard of it somewhere." The white-bearded old man frowned and muttered something. Suddenly, he fell silent. He seemed to have thought of something as shock and disbelief flashed across his eyes. However, he hid the shock in his eyes very well and didn't let Ji Tianqing discover it. When Ji Tianqing saw that the white-bearded old man had stopped attacking, he opened his mouth and asked, "Senior, if you are no longer angry, can you listen to my explanation now?" The white-bearded old man came back to his senses and glared at him. "What's there to explain? How are you going to quibble? This old man's roof has been torn down by you, and the azure spirit tree has also been stripped bare by you. Even the 10-odd stalks of jade soul grass have been uprooted by you. Whose house is clean like yours?" Ji Tianqing was speechless. He could only look ashamed. Fortunately, the white-bearded old man was no longer crazy and had no intention of attacking again. He then removed the sword net and retracted the sword chi into his body. At this moment, the white-bearded old man waved his hand and released an invisible force that wrapped around the black dragon sword that had fallen in the corner of the courtyard. The black dragon sword was suddenly wrapped in an invisible force and involuntarily flew to the white-bearded old man. The white-bearded old man grabbed the black dragon sword and sized it up. He stretched out his finger and fiercely flicked the blade of the sword. "Despicable little bastard, who asked you to destroy my spirit medicine?" Although on the surface, the old man was scolding Ji Tianqing. But in reality, this sentence of his was more like scolding the little black dragon. After all, the little black dragon was flicked by his finger. His waist hurt so much that it felt like it was broken. He nearly could not hold back and let out a miserable cry. The white-bearded old man reached out again and grabbed the scabbard on Ji Tianqing's back across the air. Clang! He put the black dragon sword back into the scabbard and said to Ji Tianqing with a black face, "Boy, this old man will temporarily confiscate this treasure sword of yours. Treat it as your punishment." Ji Tianqing's expression instantly changed, and he hurriedly cried out, "Senior, that sword is incomparably important to me. It's comparable to my life." The black dragon sword was not only his trump card, it was also one of his secrets. This secret absolutely could not be leaked. Otherwise, there would be unexpected consequences. But the white-bearded old man glared at him and shouted with a face full of anger, "Important my ass. Boy, you're currently a criminal. You have no right to discuss conditions with this old man." He pointed at the courtyard covered in leaves and tiles and shouted again, "You made this, so hurry up and clean it up for this old man. And those tiles on the roof, put them back in their original places for this old man, one by one." Ji Tianqing immediately revealed a troubled expression. Filled with grief and indignation, he muttered, "Old man, you're making things difficult for me, those tiles are all broken." The white-bearded old man angrily glared at him and sneered, "You don't want to take responsibility, do you?" As he spoke, his figure flashed in front of Ji Tianqing and reached out to grab Ji Tianqing's waist. Ji Tianqing instinctively retreated, but he could not escape the white-bearded old man's demonic claws that were as fast as lightning. Whoosh! The white-bearded old man grabbed the 100 treasures brocade pouch that was tied to his waist. Before Ji Tianqing could get angry, the white-bearded old man grabbed the 100 treasures brocade pouch and directly pulled out the little ice fox, Qianyu, who was hiding in the pouch. Poor Qianyu, who was sleeping comfortably in the pouch, was suddenly awakened when it was suddenly pulled out. It opened its long and clear eyes and glanced at the white-bearded old man. Immediately, it began to struggle violently. "Oh my God, where did this white-bearded old monkey come from? Let me go." Unfortunately, no matter how hard Qianyu struggled, it could not escape from the white-bearded old man's hands. Ji Tianqing's expression changed drastically, and his eyes were filled with a cold light. He had never expected that the white-bearded old man's strength was so unfathomable that he could see through the 100 treasures brocade pouch and know that there was a little ice fox hidden in it. Moreover, the white-bearded old man had seized his black dragon sword. Obviously, he had also seen through the black dragon sword's secret. In front of the white-bearded old man, Ji Tianqing had no secrets at all. Thinking of this, deep fear and vigilance arose in his heart. He stared at the white-bearded old man. He said in a cold tone, "Senior, everyone has their own secrets and trump cards. If there is no enmity between them, they will not rashly expose it. Today, I am weak. You are a powerful senior in the sect. If you want to take my sword and pet, I have nothing to say. But one day, I will take them back with my own hands." The white-bearded old man glanced at him and sneered disdainfully, "Ha, you bastard. Do you think I want to take your sword and pet? What a joke. Although that sword and this little ice fox are very rare, I have roamed the continent for 200 years. What kind of legendary weapons and legendary beasts have I not seen? Why would I care about these mere worldly possessions?" For some reason, when he said these words, Ji Tianqing actually felt an overbearing aura that looked down on the world and looked down on the common people. His thin and short body was actually as majestic as a giant. People could only look up to him. After he finished speaking, the white-bearded old man used his finger to pinch the little ice fox Thousand Moon. Thousand Moon repeatedly opened its mouth to bite his finger, but no matter how hard it tried, it could not bite. He looked up at the sky and calmly said, "Kid, it's getting dark. You should go back to the Wind Cloud courtyard. I've confiscated your sword and pet, in case you don't want to come back after you leave," the old man said. "If you want to take back your sword and pet, then obediently sweep the floor every day. I will see your performance. When I am in a good mood, I will naturally return them to you." With that, the white-bearded old man took the black dragon sword and the little ice fox Thousand Moon, turned around and walked into the depths of the courtyard. Ji Tianqing subconsciously followed him. He wanted to say something. However, the white-bearded old man casually waved his hand and released an invisible and majestic force. It wrapped around Ji Tianqing and flew him out of the courtyard, landing at the gate 1,000 meters away. Chapter 104. The white-bearded old man's methods were truly unfathomable. Ji Tianqing could do nothing to him. After standing outside the door for a while, he could only turn and leave. After he left, the white-bearded old man took Qianyu and the black dragon sword and returned to a palace in the depths of the Great Peace Palace. The white-bearded old man entered an antique room, and the door and windows automatically closed. He casually threw Qianyu and the black dragon sword on the table and sat by the table. He poured himself a cup of light green spirit tea and slowly tasted it. The tea was steaming hot and exuded a strong energy fluctuation. It was clearly of extraordinary quality and effect. Qianyu's eyes darted around. While the white-bearded old man was sipping his tea, he quietly left the table and flapped his wings in an attempt to escape. The black dragon sword also flew into the air, wanting to take the opportunity to break through the window and escape. The white-bearded old man was still leisurely sipping his tea. He did not even bat an eyelid and only flicked the fingers of his left hand. Suddenly, two invisible forces wrapped around Xian Yu and the black dragon sword and pulled them back to the table. The invisible force imprisoned them, making them unable to move. They could only lie on the table obediently. Xian Yu struggled a few times but to no avail. He glared at the white-bearded old man and cursed angrily, "Stupid old man, let me go. You're already so old, why don't you have the demeanor of a senior? Don't think that just because you're strong, we'll submit to you. Don't even think about it." The white-bearded old man was not angry. He put down the teacup and looked at Xian Yu. He smiled and said, "I have a name, not stupid old man. My honorific name is Xiang Wuji. Martial artists call me Wuji Spiritual Master. Little fox, you should call me Senior Xiang or Wuji Spiritual Master." Xian Yu frowned and said angrily, "Old man Xiang. Although you're a highly respected senior, we've decided to follow old Ji. We won't easily change our allegiance. Don't think that you can win our trust by pretending. We won't betray our friends." The black dragon sword also shook a few times and nodded in agreement. Xiang Wuji raised his eyebrows and said to Qian Yu seriously, "Humph. You two brats really don't know what's good for you. The rules of the sky-bearing sect forbid foreign races and demon beasts from entering the sect. Once discovered, they will be executed. If this old man hadn't asked you to stay and continue to follow Ji Tianqing, you would have been discovered by others sooner or later. At that time, both of you will be roasted and eaten." Xian Yu's eyes widened in shock and fear, and all 12 of his furry tails stood up. Of course, it could tell that Xiang Wuji was not exaggerating. Seeing that Xian Yu and the little black dragon had calmed down and were no longer struggling to escape, Xiang Wuji flicked his finger and removed the invisible energy binding them. He said with an indifferent expression, "If you still want to escape, this old man will not stop you. But you must know that once you are exposed, not only will you be executed, Ji Tianqing will also be expelled from the sect." The black dragon sword lay silently on the table, not moving at all. Xian Yu obediently lay on the table. After rolling his eyes, he said to Xiang Wuji with a smile, "Old man Xiang, you are a senior expert. Of course we believe your words. Since you are doing this for the good of old Ji and us, we naturally understand your good intentions. Don't worry, we won't run away. We'll stay in your great peace palace. How peaceful and carefree." After saying this, he tapped the black dragon sword and asked, "Little black dragon, don't you think so?" The black dragon sword quickly bounced twice and nodded. Xiang Wuji poked Xian Yu's little head with a finger and said with a smile, "Hee hee, you sly little fox. You really know how to sail with the wind." Then, he touched the black ring on his left thumb and took out a pile of snacks like a magic trick, placing them on the table. "Seeing that you've all lost your life's cultivation, you're quite pitiful. This old man will give you some snacks. You can eat as much as you want." Although Xiang Wuji said it casually, the snacks on the table were all fruits filled with spiritual qi, as well as rare dried fruits. There were fist-sized pink peaches, basin-sized golden pears, fiery red vermilion fruits and spirit fire fruits, and many other strange dried fruits. Even Xian Yu could not name them. The large pile of fruits emitted a thick fragrance and spiritual qi. Clearly, they were all valuable spiritual fruits. Xian Yu's eyes widened. Saliva dripped from his mouth and his eyes shone. Wow! So many spiritual fruits. I've never seen so many spiritual fruits in my life. Old man Xiang, are you really giving these to us to eat? Xian Yu looked at Lu Wuji in shock and disbelief. The black dragon sword also flew out of its scabbard and turned into a 3-meter-long black dragon. It circled the table and stared at the fruits, drooling. Xiang Wuji smiled and nodded. His tone and expression were very kind as he said, "Of course it's for you. Don't worry and eat. If it's not enough, this old man has more." "Ha ha ha, old man Xiang, thank you. We won't stand on ceremony then." Xian Yu cheered happily and immediately dove into the pile of fruits. He hugged a spiritual fruit and started munching on it. The little black dragon was not to be outdone. It opened its mouth and swallowed a few spiritual fruits. After chewing a few times, it swallowed them down. It looked like it was swallowing dates. When Ji Tianqing returned to the storm courtyard, it was already late at night. Dinner time had passed. The errand boy, Xiaofan, had left the food box outside his door and had already left. Ji Tianqing returned to his room. After washing up, he began to eat. After a day of torment in the Great Peace Palace, he was now tired and hungry. He finished his dinner in a few bites. After dinner, he sat at the table and drank tea. He recalled what happened last night and quickly fell into deep thought. Last night, that black shadow lured me out. This morning, Deacon Du and Deacon Mu found the white sun fruit in my room. It must be that when I was lured out, someone took the opportunity to put the white sun fruit in my room and framed me. But I've only been in the storm courtyard for 2 days. Who wants to frame me? When he thought of this, his first thought was Ji Ling. After all, he and Ji Ling had a deep grudge. Sooner or later, they would fight to the death. But when he thought about it, he felt that it was illogical. That black shadow is very strong. It's very likely that it has reached the mystic comprehending realm. Moreover, it's very familiar with the terrain of the sect. It shouldn't be Ji Ling, but other than Ji Ling, who else would frame me? Ji Tianqing frowned and thought for a while. Another person appeared in his mind. Changfeng Nation's eldest prince, Lu Mingyang. Lu Mingyang had broken through to the mystic comprehending realm in the entrance competition and entered the Sky Pillar sect directly. Moreover, Lu Mingyang had a grudge against him and Nie Hao. He was a despicable and sinister person who would seek revenge for the smallest grievance. Ji Tianqing felt that the black shadow was very likely Lu Mingyang. However, after he calmly analyzed it, he still felt that something was wrong. Although Lu Mingyang has a grudge with me and his strength has reached the mystic comprehending realm, he has just entered the Sky Pillar sect. However, this person has just entered the Sky Bearing sect and is not familiar with the terrain of the sect. He shouldn't have the guts to break into the storm courtyard at night and steal the white sun fruit to frame me. The person who framed me is neither Ji Ling nor Lu Mingyang. Then who could it be? Ji Tianqing couldn't figure it out no matter how hard he pondered. He sat under the lamp for an hour before entering the secret chamber to cultivate. Chapter 105. The night was deep. On the summit of the sky-supporting peak, there were rows upon rows of palaces and houses. This was the residence of the inner sect disciples and deacons. The lights in the various palaces and houses were lit, but the vast majority of people had already fallen asleep or were cultivating in their rooms. Ji Ling, who was wearing a green robe, was standing at the door of a certain room, holding a square sandalwood box in his hand. He reached out and knocked on the door a few times. Soon, a handsome young man in a white robe opened the door and welcomed him in. The two entered the room and exchanged greetings with smiles on their faces. Ji Ling cupped his hands to the handsome young man and said with a smile, "Brother Lu, it has been 2 days since I entered the sect. I just settled down recently, so I came to visit Brother Lu. Please don't take offense." As he spoke, he held the sandalwood box with both hands and handed it to the handsome young man. "Brother Lu, this is the 1,000-year fire jade that I specially brought from the Azure Cloud Empire as a congratulatory gift for Brother Lu entering the inner sect. I hope Brother Lu will accept it." The handsome young man was the eldest prince of the Changfeng Empire, Lu Mingyang, who had just entered the inner sect 2 days ago. When he heard the words thousand-year fire jade, his eyes immediately lit up. He opened the sandalwood box to take a look. Sure enough, there was a piece of fiery red jade lying quietly in the box. Lu Mingyang accepted the sandalwood box and hurriedly cupped his hands to express his gratitude to Ji Ling. He said with a smile, "Ji Ling, you and I have known each other for many years, and our brotherhood is deep. It's enough that you can come to visit me. Why do you have to give me such a generous gift?" Ji Ling hurriedly said with a smile, "It's precisely because we have known each other for many years that I know that Brother Lu is looking for spirit medicines and treasures that can cure cold poison everywhere. That's why I specially gave you this thousand-year fire jade." Lu Mingyang nodded repeatedly and said with a face full of gratitude, "Ji Ling, you're still loyal enough. Alright, I'll accept this thousand-year fire jade." The two exchanged a few words and began to drink tea. Lu Mingyang took a sip of tea. After putting down the teacup, he said with a face full of regret, "Ji Ling, I originally thought that you would definitely be able to enter the Sky Pillar sect as first place in the large competition. I didn't expect that fellow called Ji Tianqing would take first place. What a pity." At the mention of Ji Tianqing, Ji Ling's face darkened. She sneered and said, "It's all that bastard Ji Tianqing's fault. He actually snatched my first place, causing me to only be second. Fortunately, I had another opportunity. After Brother Lu entered the inner sect, I took your spot and entered the Tempest Courtyard as I wished. Even so, I was criticized by many disciples. That damn Ji Tianqing, I will never let him off." Lu Mingyang raised his eyebrows and asked with interest, "Speaking of this matter, I also wanted to ask you, Ji Ling, what kind of opportunity did you obtain? He's actually valued so highly by the sect?" Ji Ling revealed a confident smile and said, "When I first came to the sect, I came with 3 genius disciples and 2 deacons. I once heard senior brother Hao Meng mention that I was someone the sect was specially looking for. I seem to have some other use for them. However, I'm not too sure about the specific reason." Lu Mingyang nodded and said with a smile, "No matter what the reason is, I have to congratulate you in advance. Ji Ling, you are useful to the sect, so the sect will value and nurture you. Your future will definitely be bright. Half a year later, when you pass the examination and enter the inner sect, we will work together and help each other improve." Ji Ling cupped her hands and said with a smile, "Of course." Lu Mingyang was silent for a moment before continuing, "On the day of the entrance ceremony, I saw Ji Tianqing. I actually know that brat. He's quite arrogant." Ji Ling raised her eyebrows and asked with a puzzled tone, "Oh? Brother Lu, how do you know Ji Tianqing? Tell me about it." Lu Mingyang sneered and said, "That was in Fengyang City. That brat Ji Tianqing helped his friend steal the myriad spirit jade pillow that I was determined to obtain, ruining my plan. Since he has also come to the sky-bearing sect, this is exactly what I want. I will definitely punish him severely." Ji Ling revealed a playful smile, "Since Brother Lu also has a grudge with him, then he is our common enemy. That's right, that brat Ji Tianqing is also unlucky. On the second day of entering the storm courtyard, he stole a spirit fruit from the spirit medicine garden and was punished by the deacon to sweep the floor for a month. In the examination in a month, he will definitely be at the bottom, humph." Lu Mingyang immediately sneered and said, "There's actually such a thing? Then he really deserves it. I just settled down in the inner sect these 2 days. When I have time, I will also deal with him." Ji Ling glanced at him and the smile on her face became even more playful. "Just now, I was wondering if that matter was done by you, Brother Lu. Now it seems that the two of us haven't even made a move against Ji Tianqing, but someone else has already made a move against him." Lu Mingyang nodded and sneered, "This is called committing many unjust deeds leads to one's own destruction. Ji Tianqing is too arrogant and despotic, making too many enemies. There are still others in the sect who want to deal with him. In this way, sooner or later, he will be killed by someone or expelled from the sky-bearing sect. Ji Ling sneered complacently, if the result is like this, I am really looking forward to it, ha ha ha. After that, the two of them whispered a few more words before Ji Ling left in satisfaction. Early in the morning, after Ji Tianqing finished washing up, he walked out of his room. The other disciples of the storm courtyard were all reading or practicing martial arts in the courtyard. There were also people who carried the 1,000 medicine collection to the spirit medicine garden to study. He could only go to the Grand Peace Palace and continue cleaning the palace. Of course, even if he was punished to sweep the floor of the Grand Peace Palace, he didn't want to fall behind others and carried the 1,000 medicine collection with him. After arriving at the Grand Peace Palace, he greeted the middle-aged mute at the entrance and entered the palace to begin sweeping. In the courtyard of the second courtyard, the ground was still covered with weeds, leaves, and broken tiles. It was a mess. Ji Tianqing held a broom in his right hand and swept the floor. His left hand was still holding the 1,000 medicine collection as he carefully memorized the contents of the book. As a result, the speed at which he swept the floor was much slower, and the efficiency at which he learned to identify medicinal herbs was also not high. An entire morning had passed and he still hadn't finished cleaning the courtyard. He had only memorized 100 types of herbs in the book. However, there was no other way. He didn't want to be at the bottom of the examination at the end of the month and become the target of ridicule. At noon, the sun was scorching in the courtyard. Ji Tianqing sat on a stone bench under the eaves to rest and focused on reading the 1,000 medicine collection. Suddenly, a sharp sound broke through the air and a cold azure light shot towards him. Whoosh! Ji Tianqing was immediately awakened. Holding the 1,000 medicine collection, he dashed 3 meters away and luckily dodged the attack of the cold azure light. Ding! The cold azure light hit the stone bench and created a fist-sized hole in it. Many stone fragments flew out. Ji Tianqing's pupils suddenly contracted. He looked around with a grave expression, looking for the person who attacked him. Chapter 106. However, just as Ji Tianqing was looking around, a few more rays of green light came from the depths of the palace. Only then did he see clearly that the 3 rays of light were finger-sized green sword rays. The 3 sword rays were aimed at his left, right, and forehead. They were extremely fast and powerful. Ji Tianqing's expression changed. He quickly jumped 4 meters away and jumped into the courtyard from the eaves. He used all his strength and dodged as fast as he could. Only then did he manage to dodge the 3 sword rays. Even so, 1 sword ray brushed past his shoulder and cut a hole in his robe. Ji Tianqing jumped into the courtyard. Just as his feet landed on the ground, before he could even stabilize himself, 3 more green sword rays came at him. Swish swish swish. He had no choice but to use all his strength to retreat and avoid the sword rays. Swish swish swish. Just as the 3 sword rays dissipated, another wave of sword rays came at him. This time, the angle of the attack was even more tricky and the speed was faster. Ji Tianqing was forced into a corner. He could only jump back and forth in the courtyard and dodge the attacks. Within a short span of 100 breaths, he was attacked by more than 300 sword rays. He did not even have the chance to stop and take a breath. Finally, after 100 breaths, there were no more sword rays coming from the depths of the palace. Ji Tianqing also managed to dodge the attack. He sat on the ground with a pale face and panted heavily. He was in a sorry state. He was sweating profusely and his messy hair was also wet. His green robe was not only soaked in sweat, but also had more than 10 holes in it. He looked like a beggar. In the past 100 breaths, he was dancing on the edge of a knife. He had brushed shoulders with death countless times. There were a few times when he was almost hit by the sword rays and died on the spot. At this time, a thin figure walked out from the depths of the palace and came to the courtyard. This figure was Xiang Wuji. Qianyu flapped his wings and followed closely beside him. Ji Tianqing saw Xiang Wuji and shouted angrily, "Senior! I have already followed our agreement to clean the palace. Why are you doing this to me?" When the hundreds of sword rays came at him, he had already guessed that it was the white-bearded old man who did it. Of course, Xiang Wuji would not deny it. He stared at Ji Tianqing angrily and scolded him. "Little bastard, do you think sweeping the floor can offset the crimes you've committed? In your dreams. Last night, your pet, the little fox, stole and ate my precious spirit fruit. There were cinnabar fruit, fire fruit, ice fruit, dragon fruit, and spirit peach. A total of 28 spirit fruits, all of which are extremely rare and priceless treasures. Bastard, how do you think we should settle this debt?" Xiang Wuji pointed his finger at Qian Yusei, one by one. The little ice fox tilted her head and looked at him. She was stunned and had a dull expression on her face. "Of you, Qian Yu, Qian Yu, Qian Yu, Qian. Qian's Qian, Qian, Qian Yu, Qian, Qian, Qian. Qian Yu, Qian Yu. You've eaten so many precious spirit fruits. I can't pay you back even if I sell my entire fortune." Qian Yu came back to its senses. It waved its paws and explained anxiously, "Old Ji. You have to believe me. It's not like that. Listen to me." Before it could finish, it was interrupted by Xiang Wuji. Xiang Wuji glared at Qian Yu and shouted, "What's there to explain? What's there to explain? Little fox, tell me the truth. Did you eat those spirit fruits last night?" Qian Yu frowned, its eyes filled with grievance. After a moment of silence, it nodded and said, "Yes, I ate those spirit fruits, but what? No buts." Xiang Wuji waved his hand and interrupted it again. Then, he shouted at Ji Tianqing angrily, "Bastard, did you hear that? Little fox has admitted its crime. Tell me, how are you going to compensate me for my loss?" Ji Tianqing was in a dilemma. His face was dark and uncertain. Hundreds of thoughts flashed through his mind. However, the situation was not good. Qian Yu had indeed made a mistake. He could not defend himself. In the end, he could only suppress the anger in his heart. He cupped his hands and said to Xiang Wuji, "Senior, those spirit fruits are priceless. I can't pay you back even if I sell my entire fortune. I can only apologize to you on behalf of Qian Yu. You can punish me however you want." Xiang Wuji's eyes flashed with a smile. However, he still shouted angrily, "Humph! At least you know what's good for you. Of course I'm going to punish you. I'm going to punish you severely. Come with me." Then, Xiang Wuji put his hands behind his back and left the courtyard with Qian Yu. Ji Tianqing could only follow and enter the third courtyard of the Great Palace. The third courtyard was even more spacious. The courtyard was filled with dust and leaves. There were also weeds that were half the height of a person. Xiang Wuji stood at the entrance of the courtyard. He pointed to the roof of a row of houses in the west and said, "The herbs that are drying on the roof are all ingredients that I use to refine pills. Before the sky turns dark, you have to categorize those dried herbs and put them into the medicine cabinet in the pill room." Hearing his words, Ji Tianqing looked towards the west side of the roof. He saw that the roof of the west side of the row of houses was covered with herbs of different colors. Countless herbs were spread out on the roof. It was 3 meters wide and 30 meters long. It looked like a huge multicolored carpet. Ji Tianqing's expression changed. He looked troubled as he muttered to himself, "There are so many herbs. There must be at least tens of thousands of them. There are still 8 hours before the sky turns dark. How can I complete the task?" Xiang Wuji did not seem to see his expression. He shouted again, "Kid, not only do you have to put the herbs away, you can't make a single mistake. Otherwise, I won't be polite to you." After saying this, Xiang Wuji brought Qianyu into the main hall. He sat in the armchair and drank tea, closing his eyes to rest. Ji Tianqing smiled bitterly and helplessly. He could only work obediently. He came to the west side of the courtyard and looked up at the roof. He could not help but frown. This row of houses was simple and grand. It was wide and tall. The roof was 5 meters above the ground. With his strength, he could jump onto the roof in one leap. But he had to take care of tens of thousands of herbs. If he jumped up and down tens of thousands of times, how could his body take it? Thus, Ji Tianqing turned to look for a wooden ladder in the room. Xiang Wuji, who was sitting in the main hall drinking tea, shouted without looking up, "You are a true energy realm martial artist. You need to find a ladder to go up to the roof? Don't you feel embarrassed? Also, you don't need to find one. I don't have one in my Great Peace Palace." Ji Tianqing frowned. He felt even more depressed. He could only walk back to the west side of the row of houses and jump onto the roof. But just as he jumped into the air, Xiang Wuji's cold and angry voice came from the main hall. "Kid, be gentler. If you dare to break a single tile, I will hang you up and beat you." Ji Tianqing was in the air. When he heard this, his face turned green with anger. But he did not dare to lose his temper. If he really broke the glazed tiles on the roof, the stinky old man would definitely flip out. He could only take a deep breath and infuse his body with true energy. His body lightly landed on the roof. As a result, the glazed tiles were completely undamaged. He had to maintain the circulation of true energy and walk on the roof like he was using qing gong to collect the herbs. Chapter 107. These herbs are blood spirit grass, and those are illusory sun grass. These herbs are evil heart flowers, and they are highly poisonous. I can't touch them with my hands. Ji Tianqing stood on the roof, bent down to identify the herbs, and carefully tidied them up. He had studied the 1,000 medicine collection diligently before, and now he could identify more than 1,000 herbs. Therefore, he was no stranger to the tens of thousands of herbs on the roof. When he had to tidy up the evil heart flowers, he had to tear a piece of cloth from his robe and wrap it up to avoid being poisoned if he touched it with his hands. After a while, he jumped from the roof back to the courtyard with a dozen herbs in his left hand and a dozen evil heart flowers wrapped in cloth in his right hand. The alchemy room was next to the lobby, and it was an extremely spacious and bright room. After Ji Tianqing entered the alchemy room, he saw 3 alchemy furnaces of different sizes in the center of the room. The smallest alchemy furnace was only the size of a wash basin, and it was made of brass and other materials. The largest black alchemy furnace was more than 3 meters tall, and it looked ancient and very mysterious. On the 4 walls of the alchemy room, there were rows of hidden compartments of different sizes, and each compartment was engraved with the name of a herb. There were at least 3,600 hidden compartments on the 4 walls, and they were used to store more than 3,600 kinds of herbs. Obviously, these were the alchemy room's medicine cabinets. Ji Tianqing stared at the countless hidden compartments on the wall, and after searching for a full quarter of an hour, he found the hidden compartment that stored the blood spirit grass, illusory sun grass, and evil heart flowers, and put these 3 herbs in. Then, he walked out of the alchemy room, jumped to the roof on the west side, and bent down to continue identifying the herbs. Although he could recognize most of the herbs, there were a few that he had not seen before. He could only flip through the 1,000 medicine collection and identify the herbs that he did not recognize. Time passed quietly, and the sun in the sky gradually set in the west. After 2 hours, Ji Tianqing had only tidied up more than 400 herbs, and identified more than 50 kinds. At this speed, it would take him at least 3 days to finish tidying up the tens of thousands of herbs on the roof. There was nothing he could do about it. During this period of time, he encountered 2 medicinal herbs that he did not recognize. He could only patiently read through the 1,000 medicine collection to find the answer. At this moment, Xiang Wuji's voice came from the hall again. The old man was clearly getting impatient. "Brat! How long will it take for you to finish cleaning up the herbs if you keep dawdling like this?" Ji Tianqing was also a little anxious and angry. He held a palm-sized dark brown herb and explained to Wuji, "Senior, this junior has already done his best. However, when I encounter herbs that I don't recognize, I can only look at the 1,000 herb collection to identify them. I don't dare to place them randomly." Xiang Wuji sneered and said contemptuously, "You don't even know the 5 lights Ganoderma, and you still have the nerve to say that you've seen the 1,000 medicine collection? The 5 lights Ganoderma grows on dry rocks facing the sun. It contains earth and fire elemental energy of heaven and earth. It's the main ingredient for refining the wind-fire Xian pill and good dust Xian pill." Although Xiang Wuji's tone was unfriendly, he casually mentioned the name of the herb, its growth characteristics and effects. This saved Ji Tianqing a lot of time. He listened carefully to Xiang Wuji's words and memorized the appearance, effects and characteristics of the 5 lights Ganoderma. Following this, his speed of cleaning up the herbs was indeed much faster. Another 2 hours passed. Ji Tianqing had cleaned up another 1,000 herbs and identified more than 70 herbs. However, he quickly encountered more than 10 herbs that he didn't recognize. He wanted to ask Xiang Wuji, but when he thought of Xiang Wuji's bad attitude and tone, he dismissed the idea. He squatted on the roof and flipped through the 1,000 herb collection, trying to find the answer in the book. 15 minutes passed. Ji Tianqing found a herb called the demon spirit flower in the 1,000 herb collection. It was very similar to the herb in his hand. However, after careful identification and comparison, he realized that the herb in his hand wasn't the demon spirit flower. It was just very similar. Ji Tianqing had no choice but to continue flipping through the 1,000 herb collection. Very quickly, an hour passed. He finished flipping through half of the 1,000 herb collection, but still found nothing. At this time, Xiang Wuji's voice rang out in the hall. "Kid, don't waste your time. Even if you turn the 1,000 herb collection upside down, you won't find the answer. The herb in your hand is very precious. It's called the God Flame herb. This herb isn't recorded in the 1,000 herb collection, nor in the spiritual herb garden." Ji Tianqing silently listened. He memorized the appearance of the God Flame herb and what Xiang Wuji said. Unknowingly, 8 hours passed. The sun had set and the sky was dark. Night was about to fall. Ji Tianqing worked hard for 8 hours. In total, he had cleaned up more than 5,000 herbs and identified more than 700 types. However, even with his hard work, he had only completed a third of the task. His heart was a little uneasy. He was secretly guessing how the damned old man would react. After a while, Xiang Wuji brought Qianyu out of the hall and into the courtyard. He glanced at the herbs on the roof and said calmly, "It's getting dark. You should go back to the storm courtyard. Come back tomorrow and continue working." Ji Tianqing was a little surprised. He didn't expect Xiang Wuji to not be angry. He hesitated and asked, "Senior, the herbs are still on the roof. There will be dew at night. It won't do to soak the herbs." Before he could finish his words, he saw a shocking scene. Xiang Wuji casually waved his hand and sent out an invisible force. It wrapped around the countless herbs on the roof. The 10,000 herbs flew in front of Xiang Wuji and flowed into the black thumb ring on his left hand. In the blink of an eye, Xiang Wuji had collected the 10,000 herbs. The whole process was very easy. To him, it was as simple as eating and drinking. After collecting the herbs, Xiang Wuji turned and left with Qianyu. Ji Tianqing stared at Xiang Wuji's back in shock. After a long time, he came back to his senses. "Ah! That damned old man. He could have collected all the herbs with a wave of his hand, but he made me jump up and down on the roof for the whole afternoon. He's doing this on purpose. Too hateful. Ji Tianqing was very angry and ashamed. He clenched his fists and roared in his heart. A moment later, Xiang Wuji and Qian Yu disappeared into the depths of the palace. Ji Tianqing could only suppress the anger in his heart and leave the great palace before it got dark. When he returned to the wind cloud courtyard, it was already dark. When he returned to his room, he collapsed on the bed to rest. He didn't even want to move a finger. Today in the great palace, he had been attacked by the old man's sword energy and had almost used up all his true essence. Then he had been punished to collect the herbs on the roof. He had jumped up and down a few hundred times. He was already exhausted. Fortunately, after he ate dinner, he recovered his strength. After eating, he sat at the table and thought about what had happened during the day. Although today in the great palace, I was miserably messed with by that damned old man. I was so tired that my bones were about to fall apart. But thinking about it carefully, I remembered more than 1,000 herbs today. I also recognized 2 herbs that were not in the 1,000 medicine collection. That damned old man attacked me with his sword energy and forced me to use a light body technique on the roof. It also increased my reaction and speed a lot. I can also use the light body technique more easily. It seems that a difficult situation can train a person. If I had been in secluded cultivation in my room, I wouldn't have been able to achieve this effect. I wouldn't have improved so quickly. Chapter 108. For the next 2 days, Ji Tianqing went to the Grand Peace Palace to work every day. Every day, he would leave early in the morning and only return to the storm courtyard when it was dark. Every day, he would be exhausted. In the first 2 days, Xiang Wuji placed more than 10,000 medicinal herbs on the roof to dry. Ji Tianqing had to organize the dried herbs and place them into the medicine cabinet in the pill room. While he was organizing the herbs on the roof, Xiang Wuji sat in the main hall drinking tea or resting with his eyes closed. Every time he encountered an unknown herb, Xiang Wuji would insult him and then tell him the herb's name, characteristics, and effects. After 2 days of work, Ji Tianqing finally organized more than 10,000 herbs and placed them into the medicine cabinet without any mistakes. During this time, he had clearly identified more than 3,000 herbs in the 1,000 medicine collection and had a deep impression of them. In addition, he also recognized more than 100 special herbs. They were all rare species that didn't exist in the 1,000 medicine collection or the spirit medicine garden. On the 3rd day, Ji Tianqing finally didn't have to organize the herbs anymore. He originally thought that he could finally sweep the floor in peace and no longer be tortured by Xiang Wuji's tricks. However, he didn't think that Xiang Wuji would punish him to take care of the herbs in the medicine garden. The Grand Peace Palace's medicine garden was Xiang Wuji's private medicine garden. Although this medicine garden wasn't as big as the spirit medicine garden in the sky upholding peak, it was still a full kilometer in radius. There were more than 3,600 types of herbs in the medicine garden. In total, there were more than 100,000 stalks. Ji Tianqing's task was to continuously water the herbs, loosen the soil, remove the weeds, and prune the branches and leaves every day. In the beginning, Ji Tianqing refused this tedious and tiring task. He was very unwilling to accept it. However, Xiang Wuji confidently said that his medicine garden was the best in the sky upholding sect and planted with the most precious and rare herbs. Ji Tianqing should feel extremely honored and proud to be able to enter his private medicine garden. Countless genius disciples, deacons, and elders of the sky upholding sect wanted to help him take care of the herbs in his medicine garden, but they didn't have the fortune to do so. Moreover, Ji Tianqing was now a criminal. He had to accept his punishment and work honestly. Only then could his punishment be reduced. Under Xiang Wuji's threats and promises, Ji Tianqing had no choice but to work in the herb garden and take care of the herbs. Every day, he dealt with more than 3,000 kinds of medicinal herbs. He was busy from dawn to nightfall, and only then did he drag his tired body back to the Tempest courtyard. Of course, Ji Tianqing had worked in the medicinal garden for 2 days, and it was still very rewarding. He knew more than 3,000 kinds of herbs like the back of his hand. He didn't need to look at the 1,000 herbs collection at all, and he could casually mention the growth habits and effects of various herbs. Just like that, 7 days passed in the blink of an eye. This morning, Ji Tianqing had just finished washing up and was about to head to Great Peace Palace. Suddenly, the bell rang in the main hall of the Fengyun courtyard. Ji Tianqing hurriedly stopped in his tracks. Together with the other disciples of the Tempest Hall, they quickly gathered in the main hall. After a short 100 breaths of time, the 10 disciples of the Tempest Hall were all present. Han Xiaofan and Du Wu walked into the main hall and sat at the head of the table. Han Xiaofan glanced at the 10 disciples in the main hall. With a solemn expression, he said, "Everyone, 7 days have passed. I believe that after 7 days of study, you have all memorized the 1,000 herbs collection by heart. You all have a clear understanding of the contents of the book." The disciples didn't open their mouths to speak, but most of them revealed confident smiles. They had a posture of having a card up their sleeve. Han Xiaofan saw everyone's reaction and nodded his head in satisfaction. He then continued, "Today, I want to test you all. Have you studied diligently in the past 7 days? The one with the best performance will be rewarded with a special overflowing origin pill." Hearing the 3 words overflowing origin pill, the disciples were stunned for a moment. Their faces were filled with pleasant surprise and excitement. The reward is actually a overflowing origin pill? That's great. I've long heard of the miraculous effects of the overflowing origin pill. This is a profound level high-grade pill. After taking it, it can greatly enhance one's cultivation. It's equivalent to a year of our bitter cultivation. Deacon Han is really generous. It's just a small test, but he's actually willing to take out such a miraculous profound level pill. I must obtain the overflowing origin pill. If I can take a overflowing origin pill, I'll definitely be able to reach the profound understanding realm within half a year. Several disciples were discussing in low voices. Their faces were filled with excitement and anticipation. Especially Shi Jingsheng and Emo. They were determined to obtain the overflowing origin pill. The 2 of them didn't put the other disciples in their eyes. They only regarded each other as competitors. Their eyes were filled with hostility. At this time, Han Xiaofan took out a palm-sized black cloth bag from his sleeve and placed it on the table. He stretched out his hand and touched the black cloth bag. Out of thin air, he took out a dark green herb. "Everyone, do you know what kind of herb this is?" Ji Tianqing and the other disciples immediately stared at the herb and carefully observed it. The herb was as long as a chopstick. It had a cluster of white roots and 6 leaves. It was dark green all over and emitted a faint spiritual qi. Everyone instantly recognized the herb and said in unison, "This is the spirit void herb." Han Xiaofan nodded and looked at Niehao. "Niehao, tell us about the characteristics and effects of this spirit void herb." Niehao said calmly, "The spirit void herb is commonly seen in swamps filled with miasma. It needs to grow for 8 years to mature." After he finished speaking in an orderly manner, Han Xiaofan revealed a satisfied smile. He put the spirit void grass back into the black cloth bag, and then took out a half-meter long dark brown herb from the bag. Seeing this, Ji Tianqing immediately understood that Han Xiaofan's black cloth bag was the same as his 100 treasures brocade pouch. They were both storage treasures with space inside. Han Xiaofan held the herb and asked calmly, "Everyone, do you know what kind of herb this is?" This time, everyone frowned and carefully observed for a moment before someone answered one after another. "This is the yellow tooth whisker." "Yes, this is the yellow tooth whisker." Han Xiaosheng called out Ji Ling's name and let Ji Ling explain the characteristics and effects of the yellow tooth whisker. Ji Ling revealed a confident smile and said in a confident tone, "The yellow tooth whisker usually grows in the yellow soil halfway up the mountain. There will be poisonous snakes guarding within 3 meters of it." After he finished speaking, Han Xiaosheng took out a few more herbs for everyone to identify. Each herb was more rare than the last. The time the disciples had to observe and think became longer and longer. When it came to the last herb, everyone observed it for half an hour but no one dared to say with certainty. Only Ji Tianqing had an answer in his heart after observing for 100 breaths. He just kept his mouth shut. Han Xiaosheng frowned and said in a serious tone, "What? What have you been doing these 7 days? Don't tell me you can't even recognize this herb?" Shi Jingcheng, Emo, and Ji Ling were originally hesitant. After hearing Han Xiaosheng's words, the three immediately answered and said in unison, "Deacon Han, this is the spirit sealing orchid." The other disciples also chimed in, saying that the herb was the spirit sealing orchid and that it was recorded in the collection of 1,000 herbs. Only Ji Tianqing didn't say anything. The corner of his mouth even hooked up in a playful smile. Han Xiaosheng saw his expression and called out his name. "Ji Tianqing, tell me, what is the name of this herb? What are its characteristics and effects?" Chapter 109. Hearing this, the disciples all revealed gloating smiles. Shi Jingcheng and Ji Ling even laughed and teased Ji Tianqing. "Deacon Han, did you forget? Ji Tianqing was punished by you to sweep the floor. These 7 days, he woke up early and worked late every day to clean." "That's right. Deacon Han, Ji Tianqing definitely can't answer your question. His mind must be filled with sweeping and weeding right now." Ji Tianqing glanced at Ji Ling and Shi Jingcheng with a cold expression. A hint of contempt flashed in his eyes. Then, he turned to look at Han Xiaosheng and said calmly, "Deacon Han, this herb isn't spirit-sealing orchid, but return to heaven imperial court." Hearing Ji Tianqing's answer, before Han Xiaosheng could say anything, the disciples all frowned. Return to heaven imperial court? It's clearly spirit-sealing orchid. Is he blind? What kind of lousy name is this? I've never heard of it. I've memorized all 3,520 herbs recorded in the 1,000 medicine collection. There's definitely no herb called Return to Heaven Imperial Court. Hee, looks like Ji Tianqing's brain was muddled from sweeping and made up a name, right? Look at his serious appearance. If I wasn't familiar with the 1,000 medicine collection, I would have been fooled by him. Humph, just wait and see. He dares to fool Deacon Han like this. He won't have a good ending. Shi Jingcheng, Emo, and Ji Ling secretly sneered. They looked at Ji Tianqing with eyes full of ridicule and pity. Han Xiaosheng still looked at Ji Tianqing with a calm expression and asked again, "Ji Tianqing, everyone knows this herb and believes that it's spirit-sealing orchid. Are you sure this is Return to Heaven Imperial Court? Have you carefully observed it? I hope you think carefully before answering." Ji Tianqing ignored everyone's sneers and nodded firmly. "Deacon Han, this disciple is sure that this is Return to Heaven Imperial Court." "Good, then tell us about its characteristics and effects." Han Xiaosheng's eyes flashed with an inexplicable smile. Ji Tianqing said with a normal expression, "Return to Heaven Imperial Court usually grows on mountain peaks above 3,000 meters. It's covered by snow and white clouds. It has the effect of refining the soul and promoting spiritual sense. Although its appearance is very similar to spirit-sealing orchid, even many alchemy masters would mistake it if they didn't look carefully. It is indeed different from spirit-sealing orchid. The roots of the spirit-sealing orchid are milky white and grow outwards, while the roots of the heaven-returning palace are snow-white and converge inwards." Han Xiaosheng quietly, he listened to Ji Tianqing's narration. The expressions of Shi Jingcheng, Emo, Ji Ling, and the other disciples changed drastically. In the beginning, everyone was sure that Ji Tianqing was talking nonsense, and they all looked like they were waiting to see a good show. But when they heard Ji Tianqing speak with assurance and reason, the sneers on their faces disappeared. When they heard the last part, everyone looked at each other in dismay. Their eyes were filled with shock and doubt. No way. How can this guy talk nonsense so clearly and logically? It shouldn't be. That's clearly Spirit Sealing Orchid. What Return to Heaven Imperial Court? It's not recorded in the 1000 Medicine Collection. This kid can't be telling the truth, right? Don't worry, Deacon Han hasn't announced the results yet. What bullshit Return to Heaven Imperial Court? It's not recorded in the 1000 Medicine Collection at all. Why would Deacon Han use this to test us? Everyone whispered to each other, feeling a little uneasy. Finally, Ji Tianqing's Return to Heaven Imperial Court and Spirit Sealing Orchid was calm and confident. The hall fell silent. Han Xiaofan put down the herbs in his hand and actually stood up. He looked down at Ji Tianqing with a gratified smile on his face and actually clapped his hands. Good. Very good. Very good. Han Xiaofan said 3 words in a row, which made Shi Jingcheng, Emo, Ji Ling, and the others dumbfounded on the spot. They were completely stunned. Several disciples' faces changed as they stared at Ji Tianqing in disbelief. Han Xiaofang's voice was as loud as a bell as he said, Ji Tianqing, what you said is completely correct. You even said what I wanted to say without missing a single word. You're very diligent. This origin pill is the reward you deserve. After that, he took out a dark red pill from the black cloth bag and flicked it to Ji Tianqing. Ji Tianqing took the origin pill with a smile and bowed to Han Xiaofang. Thank you, Deacon Han. Han Xiaofang waved his hand with a smile and said, Don't thank me. You earned this with your own efforts and knowledge. After that, he looked at Shi Jingcheng, Emo, and the others with a solemn expression and said in a deep voice, Although I asked you to learn the 1000 Medicine Collection, you can all recite it backwards. But people who only know how to memorize, don't observe and learn, and can't draw inferences from one case, don't deserve to be called geniuses. I asked you to learn how to identify herbs. Did you only look at the 1000 Medicine Collection? Don't you know to look at more ancient books on herbs? In the future, when you roam the world and meet enemies who use martial skills you've never seen before, are you going to sit and wait for death? If you don't even understand this principle, then why do you cultivate martial arts? Go home, farm, and have children as soon as possible. All the disciples were reprimanded so harshly by Han Xiaofang that they all looked ashamed and lowered their heads, not daring to look at Han Xiaofang. Shi Jingcheng, Emo, and Ji Ling, on the other hand, were the ones who had been jumping around the most and mocking Ji Tianqing. Now, however, their expressions were the ugliest. Among the 10 disciples, Shi Jingcheng and Emo were the most confident. However, both of them recognized the wrong herb and even swore that it was the Spirit Sealing Orchid. In the end, Ji Tianqing, who was mocked by them, recognized the Returning Heaven Imperial and pointed out the difference between this herb and the Spirit Sealing Orchid. To Shi Jingcheng and Emo, who boasted that they were proficient in alchemy, this was the greatest insult. Both of them clenched their fists as the flames of anger and humiliation surged in their hearts. They hated Ji Tianqing so much that they gnashed their teeth. If Ji Tianqing didn't give the answer and show off in front of everyone, they wouldn't have been reprimanded by Deacon Han like this. Therefore, the two of them naturally had to blame this on Ji Tianqing. After Han Xiaofang reprimanded all the disciples, he opened his mouth and announced, In the following week, everyone's task is to learn how to concoct herbs and how to match pill formulas and herbs. Duwu hurriedly walked into the main hall and took out 10 ancient books as thick as bricks and distributed them to everyone. On the cover of that black ancient book, there were 3 large words, 1000 Directions Gathering, written on it. Han Xiaofang said in a deep voice, In this week, everyone can refer to the 1000 Directions Gathering to learn. A week later, this seat will assess again. Saying that, he brought Du Wu and left the main hall. All the disciples held on to the 1,000 directions gathering, but their hearts were filled with mixed feelings. Shi Jingcheng and Emo, in particular, were glaring coldly at Ji Tianqing, as if they were burning with rage. Seeing Ji Tianqing about to turn and leave the main hall, Shi Jingcheng walked up with a black face and blocked his path. Ji Tianqing. Don't think that you can hold your head high just because you guessed a herb correctly and received Deacon Han's reward. So what if you know how to identify herbs? Wait until the end of the month assessment and you'll have to start refining pills. At that time, I'll definitely trample you under my feet. Emo also walked in front of him, his face filled with anger as he coldly shouted, Ji Tianqing, don't be complacent. The future is long. You little thief who stole the spirit fruit, sooner or later you'll be kicked out of the storm courtyard. Ji Tianqing was in a good mood and was in a hurry to rush back to his room to take the Chaoyuan pill and improve his cultivation. Shi Jingcheng and Emo suddenly showed up and scolded him without giving him any chance to explain. His face suddenly became gloomy, his eyes coldly glanced at the two and sneered, I have no enmity with the two of you, but you're insulting me for no reason. Were the two of you bitten by a mad dog when you were young and contracted the mad dog disease, so you bite everyone you see? Chapter 110. Shi Jingcheng and Emo were so angry that their lungs were about to explode. They stared at Ji Tianqing with livid faces. Ji Tianqing, how dare you insult me? You damn bastard, I'm going to teach you a lesson. Both of them were bursting with anger and fighting spirit. They clenched their fists and were about to teach Ji Tianqing a lesson. Ji Tianqing was not afraid at all. He sneered, a mad dog is indeed a mad dog. You're angry out of shame and you want to fight? Shi Jingcheng and Emo could no longer hold back their anger. They waved their fists and smashed at Ji Tianqing. Ji Tianqing, you're courting death. Bastard, get down on the ground. They besieged Ji Tianqing from both sides. Their fists were shining with the light of true essence, blowing a violent wind. Ji Tianqing's figure flashed and dodged Shi Jingcheng's attack. He was about to use his palm to meet Emo's fist. At this moment, Niehao suddenly appeared beside him. With a deep shout, he threw a punch at Emo. Their fists collided with each other, making a muffled sound and exploding violent qi. Niehao stood still and did not step back. Emo, however, was pushed back 3 steps. 2 against 1. What kind of man are you? Fight me one-on-one if you have the guts. Niehao stared at Emo indifferently. His whole body was surging with a strong fighting spirit. Emo frowned and looked at him. A hint of fear flashed through his eyes. He shouted angrily, Niehao, it's none of your business. Get out of my way. Shi Jingcheng also stared at Niehao angrily. He sneered, Niehao, you're meddling in other people's business. Do you want to be our enemy? Niehao did not care about their threats at all. He waved his fist with a sneer, Ji Tianqing is my friend. If you want to bully him, ask my fist first. You. Niehao. Let's wait and see. Shi Jingcheng and Emo were furious. They glared at Niehao and left the hall unwillingly. Ji Tianqing's eyes flashed with a cold light as he watched the two leave. He turned his head to look at Niehao and nodded with a smile. Niehao, thank you for your help. Niehao smiled and waved his hand, Brother Ji doesn't need to thank me. In fact, with Brother Ji's strength, even if I didn't make a move, the two of them wouldn't be able to do anything to you. Ji Tianqing only smiled faintly and declined to comment. The two exchanged a few pleasantries before they left the conference hall and returned to their respective rooms. After returning to his room, Ji Tianqing entered the secret chamber and took out the Chaoyuan pill to examine it carefully. This dark red Xian core contained surging yuan qi and emitted a bright red light. This pill was refined by the Sky Pillar sex alchemists. It was absolutely impossible to buy it in a mundane kingdom. Its effects were extremely powerful, and consuming one pill could increase one's cultivation by a year. Of course, the effects of the Chaoyuan pill would be the best the first time. After that, the effects would be greatly reduced. If one consumed more than 4 Chaoyuan pills, they would completely lose their effects. Ji Tianqing held the Chaoyuan pill in his hand and thought to himself, I didn't expect Administrator Han to take out the returning Heaven Imperial Court, which isn't recorded in the 1000 Medicine Collection, to test everyone. Fortunately, when I helped the stinky old man collect the herbs, I recognized many herbs that aren't in the 1000 Medicine Collection. Otherwise, I would have been stumped just now and wouldn't have been able to obtain this Chaoyuan pill. It seems that although I worked very hard in the Great Peace Palace, I was able to learn a lot of things. Thinking about it this way, Ji Tianqing felt that the suffering he had gone through in the Great Peace Palace was worth it. He finally had his reward. After collecting his thoughts, he consumed the Chaoyuan pill and began to circulate his energy to refine the medicinal effects. When the Chaoyuan pill entered his stomach, it was catalyzed by his true essence and immediately emitted surging heat waves that surged through his limbs and bones. Ji Tianqing hurriedly circulated his energy and guided the medicinal effects into his meridians. They turned into majestic true essence and gathered in the sword embryo. Time passed quietly, and his power was also increasing rapidly. Unknowingly, an entire day had passed. Ji Tianqing finally completely refined the Chaoyuan pill. His cultivation had increased by about 4 times, and the sword embryo in his body had also doubled in size. The powerful effects of the Chaoyuan pill allowed his strength to reach the 6th level of the true essence realm. Ji Tianqing finished his cultivation and walked out of the secret chamber. Only then did he realize that it was already the morning of the next day. The morning sun had just risen. The faint morning light scattered over the storm courtyard, reflecting the dew on the flowers and leaves, refracting a dazzling brilliance. Yesterday, I was cultivating in the secret chamber and didn't go to the Great Peace Palace for the entire day. The stinky old man is definitely going to flip out. Ji Tianqing frowned and hurriedly left the storm courtyard. He brought the 1000 Directions village and hurried to the Great Peace Palace. An hour later, he walked more than 10 miles and finally arrived at the Great Peace Palace. The middle-aged mute guarding the entrance of the Great Peace Palace already knew him after a week. After seeing Ji Tianqing, the middle-aged mute nodded his head in greeting and squeezed out a stiff smile. However, the middle-aged mute's face was full of scars from sabers and swords. His eyes were fierce and full of killing intent. That stiff smile of his looked very frightening. Ji Tianqing cupped his hands in greeting and hurriedly stepped through the door into the Great Peace Palace. After entering the 3rd courtyard, he picked up the broom and bamboo basket and obediently cleaned the courtyard. While cleaning, he didn't forget to flip through the 1000 Directions village and study the contents of the book. Fortunately, an entire morning had passed and Xiang Wuji still hadn't appeared. In the afternoon, it was the hottest time of the day. Ji Tianqing threw down the broom and bamboo basket and sat in the shade under the eaves to rest. He focused on reading the book. Just as he was engrossed in reading, light footsteps suddenly came from the courtyard entrance. There was also a young girl's voice calling out. "Grandmaster! I've come to visit you." The young girl's voice was very pleasant and her tone was gentle and pleasant. Most importantly, Ji Tianqing felt that this voice was somewhat familiar. He hurriedly put away the 1000 Directions village and raised his head to look at the courtyard entrance. He saw a young girl about 16 or 17 years old, wearing a long green dress, walking into the courtyard with a box of food. That young girl had a graceful figure and a pure and beautiful face. Under her neat bangs were a pair of large watery eyes. Her bright eyes and white teeth were very pleasant. She walked into the courtyard with the box of food. Her steps were light and graceful, and she had an innate gentle and demure temperament. When Ji Tianqing saw her clearly, he was stunned. Junior sister Xian. You, why are you here? Clearly, that young girl in the green dress was Xian. When she saw Ji Tianqing sitting under the eaves, she also revealed a puzzled and surprised expression. Tianqing? I've come to visit Grandmaster. Why are you here? As she spoke, she glanced at the broom and bamboo basket beside Ji Tianqing. Seeing that the bamboo basket was filled with fallen leaves, weeds, and dust, she instantly understood. Tianqing, you're here to help Grandmaster clean the courtyard? You're really considerate. Ji Tianqing smiled awkwardly and was about to explain. At this moment, Xiang Wuji's voice suddenly came from behind him. Little Xian, do you think this kid is so diligent to help me sweep the floor? He's here because he made a mistake. Chapter 111. As he spoke, Xiang Wuji walked out of one of the rooms. He was still wearing his long purple robes. His snow-white hair and beard were stained with bits of medicinal herbs and powder. Even though he was not polite to Ji Tianqing, his gaze when he looked at Xian was full of affection. His wrinkled face was full of smiles. Being punished to sweep the floor? Xian looked with surprise at Ji Tianqing. She wanted to laugh when she saw Ji Tianqing's gloomy expression, but she held it in. She walked under the eaves with the food box and bowed to Xiang Wuji. She said with a slight smile, Grandmaster, this is the dessert that Xian personally made for you. Please try it. Xiang Wuji smiled even more happily. He hurriedly took the food box and said with a gratified expression, of the juniors in the sect, little Xian is the most sensible. Not only do you often come to visit this old man, you also bring gifts for this old man. This old man likes to eat the desserts that little Xian makes. Xian gave a faint smile and hurriedly explained, Grandmaster. It is not that the Shixiang and Shiji are not willing to visit you. It is that you do not allow them to come to Greaton Palace to avoid disturbing your peace. Xiang Wuji's smile disappeared and he frowned. He said exasperatedly, Humph. Those little brats say they are coming to visit this old man. Which one of them is not thinking about this old man's spirit medicines and treasures? All of them pretend to be gentlemen. Do you think they can hide their intentions from this old man? They are so young yet they do not cultivate and always want to take shortcuts. This old man scolding them is already light. Xian explained with a slight smile, and this caused Xiang Wuji's anger to dissipate. Then Xiang Wuji took the food box and turned to enter the room. Xian did not follow him into the room. She sat on the stone bench under the eaves and asked Ji Tianqing with a slight smile, Tianqing, you have just entered the sect a few days ago. How did you make a mistake and be punished to sweep Greaton Palace? Is it because you do not understand the rules of the sect and committed some taboo? Ji Tianqing looked at her clear eyes and could feel her worry and concern. He had no doubt that if he told her that he had been framed, Xian would be even more worried. Thinking of this, he did not explain anything. He only nodded and said, Yes, after all, I'm new here. But now, I know what I'm doing. I won't do it again. Yes, I believe you. Xian smiled and nodded. She saw the 1,000 directions set in Ji Tianqing's hands and asked, Did Attendant Han ask you to learn pill recipes and concoct medicine again? That's right, Ji Tianqing nodded and said, I have to learn how to concoct medicine this week and take the alchemy assessment at the end of the month. Xian's beautiful eyes turned. She said with a slight smile, You have to clean Greaton Palace and learn the 1,000 directions set at the same time. I'm afraid you will not be able to do it. If you have any questions, you can ask me. I can help you answer them. I learned all this back then. Ji Tianqing smiled and cupped his hands. If that's the case, then I'll have to thank junior apprentice sister Xian. It's nothing. Xian nodded and smiled gently. At this time, Xiang Wuji walked out of the room and came to Xian's side. Little Xian, come and let Grandmaster take a look at your illness. How is your recovery? Xian nodded obediently and stretched out her right hand. Xiang Wuji stretched out 2 fingers and placed them on her wrist, helping her check her pulse. Ji Tianqing stood to the side and watched silently. His heart was complicated and many thoughts flashed through his mind. Junior apprentice sister Xian looks so gentle and kind. How can she be ill? Her body is unwell and she is ill, but she still cares for me so much. After a while, Xiang Wuji retracted his fingers and a gratified smile appeared on his face. Yes, not bad. In this half a month, little Xian, you have more or less recovered. The extreme cold poison has also been completely removed. I really didn't expect that this old man's herb garden would have so many spirit herbs and miraculous medicines, but none of them could cure your illness. However, the red star flower is compatible with your natal attribute. It can remove the extreme cold poison in your body and prevent you from being tortured by it in the future. Hearing Xiang Wuji's words, Ji Tianqing's expression changed and a flash of light flashed across his eyes. Many thoughts flashed through his mind and he finally understood. So, junior apprentice sister Xian's illness is due to the extreme cold poison in her body and the red star flower can help her get rid of it. This means that when Yunyao obtained the red star flower's stamen, she used it to treat junior apprentice sister Xian's illness. Both Xian and I have consumed the red star flower and our bodies have been transformed by the red star flower's medicinal power. No wonder when I first met her, I felt an inexplicable sense of closeness. So, the two of us are fated to be together. Ji Tianqing finally understood the reason. He also vaguely guessed that Xian and Yunyao must have a close relationship. After checking on Xian's condition, Xiang Wuji gave a few more instructions and turned around to get busy in the alchemy room. He originally wanted Xian to go to the alchemy room with him and help him look after the alchemy furnace and learn alchemy at the same time. However, Xian found an excuse to reject him. After Xiang Wuji left, Xian stayed in the courtyard to accompany Ji Tianqing and help him explain the contents of the Thousand Directions book. With Xian's help, Ji Tianqing did not need to flip through the Thousand Directions book and saved a lot of time. As he cleaned the courtyard, he listened to Xian's explanation of alchemy and learned more deeply and thoroughly. He was also in a good mood. Unknowingly, an afternoon passed. After the sun set, Ji Tianqing and Xian walked out of the Great Palace side by side and were about to return to their respective residences. However, just as the two of them reached the entrance of the Great Palace, they were stopped by a handsome young man in a white robe. This handsome young man was Lu Mingyang, who had just entered the inner sect. Lu Mingyang held a sandalwood box in his hands and it was obvious that he had been waiting outside for a long time. When he saw Xian walk out of the door, he immediately welcomed her with a face full of smiles. Just as he was about to speak, he suddenly saw Ji Tianqing, who was beside Xian. Seeing Ji Tianqing and Xian talking and laughing as they walked side by side, the smile on his face instantly froze and his eyes turned gloomy. At this time, Ji Tianqing and Xian also saw Lu Mingyang and stopped in their tracks. The two of them did not speak as they calmly looked at Lu Mingyang. Lu Mingyang retracted the coldness in his eyes and hurriedly revealed a gentle smile as he said to Xian, I knew that you came to the Great Palace today and specially came here to wait for you. This is the 1,000 years fire jade that I spent a lot of time and effort to collect. Even if it cannot help you get rid of the cold poison, it can help you reduce your pain. Xian, this is my kind intentions, you must accept it. Lu Mingyang fawned over Xian and his tone and expression showed that he was extremely concerned. However, Xian was indifferent to his words. After Lu Mingyang finished speaking, she then calmly said, "Take it back, I will not accept your gift. Moreover, the cold poison in my body has already been removed, you don't have to worry about it." Saying this, she turned her head to look at Ji Tianqing and smiled as she said goodbye and quickly left. Chapter 112. Xian's cold attitude made the smile on Lu Mingyang's face freeze. He looked at Xian's back as she left, and the expression on his face slowly turned cold. Recalling Ji Tianqing and Xian walking side by side, talking and laughing, the anger in his heart burned even more. When Xian's back disappeared at the end of the tree-lined path, Lu Mingyang suddenly turned around and glared at Ji Tianqing coldly. "Ji Tianqing. How do you know Xian? And you're so close to her?" His expression and eyes were very gloomy, and his tone was cold and angry. Ji Tianqing glanced at him and said expressionlessly, "What? We're all from the same sect, isn't it normal for us to know each other?" "Normal my ass." Lu Mingyang's face was livid, and he completely tore off his gentle and refined disguise, and cursed in anger. "I think you have ulterior motives, and purposely got close to Xian. As he spoke, he took 2 steps forward in front of Ji Tianqing, and shouted with a ferocious face, "Ji Tianqing, I'm warning you, stay away from Xian in the future. You're just a trash from a broken country, you don't have the qualifications to get close to Xian, you don't even have the qualifications to stand beside her. If you dare to pester Xian in the future, I won't be polite to you." Lu Mingyang's tone was incomparably arrogant, and he clenched his fists, almost unable to suppress the anger in his heart. But Ji Tianqing still looked at him indifferently, and only after he finished speaking, did he reveal a contemptuous sneer. "Lu Mingyang. Whether I have the qualifications to be friends with Xian, it has nothing to do with you. So what if you're the prince of Chongfeng country? Xian and I hit it off at first sight, and we talk happily, but she doesn't care about you. Even if you try your best to please Xian, but she doesn't have any good feelings for you. In her eyes, you're no different from the dirt and weeds on the roadside. Only a shameless fellow like you would be so thick-skinned and shameless as to pester her. Can't you tell that Xian hates you? You're already an adult. How can you be so shameless? Don't you know what shame is?" Listening to Ji Tianqing's words that didn't contain a single curse word, yet every single word was heart-wrenching. Lu Mingyang was immediately enraged, and his eyes were bloodshot. "Ah! Ji Tianqing. You're fucking courting death." Lu Mingyang could no longer hold back his anger. With a roar, he waved his fists and smashed them toward Ji Tianqing. Ji Tianqing sneered contemptuously and immediately retreated. However, Lu Mingyang was a LV1 Tongxian realm martial artist after all. His fists were surging with crimson fire true yuan, bursting with a violent force. Ji Tianqing's retreating speed slowed down a bit, and his chest was swept by the fist's qi, and a large part of his robe was scorched by the flame true essence. If his speed was any slower, he would have been injured by Lu Mingyang on the spot. "Ji Tianqing. Today, I'm going to break your legs." Lu Mingyang sneered with a ferocious face, and once again threw his fists at Ji Tianqing. Ji Tianqing's face was solemn, and a cold light surged in his eyes. Even though he had reached LV6 true energy realm, without the black dragon sword, he was still no match for Lu Mingyang. At this critical moment, he could only use his trump card and activate the sword qi in his body. Swoosh swoosh swoosh. 6 streaks of dark golden sword qi flew out from his palms, and instantly split into 12 streaks. They circled around his body and formed a sword net. Swoosh swoosh swoosh. The dense golden sword qi and sword light enveloped a 3-meter radius around him, making a sharp piercing sound. Lu Mingyang's fists smashed into the sword net, and the crimson fire true yuan blasted a large hole in the sword net, and several streaks of sword qi were sent flying. Those dark golden sword chi pierced Lu Mingyang's fists, but were unable to hurt him. Ha ha ha. Little bastard, continue to be arrogant? Now do you know the difference between true energy realm and mystic realm? If you know what's good for you, kneel down and beg for mercy. Lu Mingyang swung his fists at the sword net, and sneered at Ji Tianqing. Ji Tianqing's face was as cold as ice. He clenched his teeth and silently controlled the sword net to block Lu Mingyang's fierce attacks. Bang bang bang. A series of muffled noises burst out one after another as Lu Mingyang blasted out large holes in the sword net of flowing light. Ji Tianqing was forced to retreat, and his face was getting paler and paler. Finally, after 36 consecutive punches, Lu Mingyang roared and used his ultimate move. Raging Flame Fist. Dazzling flames surged out of his body, and he gathered all his power on his fists, forming two balls of crimson fire, and punched towards Ji Tianqing. With a muffled bang, the sword net was shattered by the two balls of scarlet flames. Ji Tianqing did not have time to dodge, and was about to be hit by the two balls of crimson fire. At this critical moment, a dark green sword aura flew out from grate and palace, and quickly arrived between the two of them. Phew! That 2-meter-long green sword aura carried a terrifying power, and instantly hit Lu Mingyang's fists. Ji Tianqing only saw a green light flash in front of his eyes, and heard a bang sound. Then he saw Lu Mingyang being sent flying. Lu Mingyang drew an arc in the air, and fell into the forest 5 meters away. He rolled a few times before coming to a stop. He struggled a few times before crawling out of the forest. Blood flowed from the corner of his mouth, his hair was messy, and his white robe was stained with mud. He looked very pathetic. He looked at grate and palace with fear, and then staggered away. But before he left, he glared at Ji Tianqing with hatred. He clearly remembered this grudge, and would definitely find a chance to take revenge in the future. Ji Tianqing looked at Lu Mingyang's retreating figure. His face darkened, and he secretly clenched his fists. He knew very well that if the stinky old man had not saved him at the critical moment, he would have been injured by Lu Mingyang. At this moment, his heart was filled with a strong desire to become stronger. No matter what, he had to increase his strength and reach the mystic comprehending state as soon as possible. Swoosh! A green light flashed, and Xiang Wuji suddenly flew out from grate and palace, and landed beside Ji Tianqing. Ji Tianqing came to his senses, and hurriedly bowed. He said sincerely, "Thank you for saving me, senior." Xiang Wuji did not reply. He glared at him angrily, and scolded, "You little bastard, you are really stupid. You are infuriating me. Such a miraculous sword chi, but you used it so crudely and crudely. What a waste of such a great talent. And your family's sword art, called the 10 Mystery Sword Art, don't use it in the future." Ji Tianqing looked at Xiang Wuji innocently. He didn't know why this old man was looking at him with such disappointment. "What are you looking at?" Xiang Wuji glared at him again, and scolded, "Don't go back to the Wind Cloud courtyard tonight. Come with me, I will teach you 2 sword arts." Begging for recommendation tickets, begging to be added to the bookshelf, please everyone. Chapter 113. Stupid old man wants to teach me swordsmanship. Ji Tianqing was stunned. He could not believe it. Xiang Wuji had always been strict with him. He would scold him if he did not get his way. If Xiang Wuji could talk to him nicely, he would be thanking the heavens. He did not expect that Xiang Wuji would take the initiative to teach him swordsmanship. Although he was not sure of Xiang Wuji's identity, he had seen Xiang Wuji's moves. They were truly mysterious and unheard of. How could he not be surprised and excited that such a mysterious expert was going to teach him swordsmanship? What are you waiting for? Come in quickly. Xiang Wuji walked into Great Peace Palace with his hands behind his back and shouted impatiently. Ji Tianqing regained his senses and hurried into the Great Peace Palace. He followed Xiang Wuji into the third courtyard. The sky was already dark and night was about to fall. Xiang Wuji stood in the middle of the courtyard. His feet stepped on the limestone floor and he exuded a mysterious and powerful aura. "Kid, I am going to teach you the Flying Star Sword technique. This sword technique has a total of 9 moves. When practiced to the extreme, it has the power to split the sky and split the earth." Hearing this, Ji Tianqing's eyes lit up, revealing a look of anticipation. "Senior, have you practiced this sword chi before? Is the Flying Star Sword technique also a sword technique to control sword chi?" Xiang Wuji glanced at him and said in a low voice, "Of course, I did not have the opportunity to practice the sword chi in your body. Otherwise, would have broken through the shackles and entered a higher realm. The Flying Star Sword technique that I am going to teach you is a sword technique that I created in 20 years. It is used to control sword radiance. Although only Primal Core Realm experts can practice and use the Flying Star Sword technique, your sword chi is very special. However, your sword chi is very special, so you can also cultivate this sword technique." After hearing his explanation, Ji Tianqing was enlightened. He nodded to show that he understood. He thought to himself, "It seems that the stupid old man has heard of the way of the sword that I practice. He just did not have the opportunity to practice it. My Tao of the Sword Heart is even more miraculous than ordinary martial arts. With my strength at the true energy stage, I can actually cultivate a Yuan Dan stage sword technique. If I can master the Flying Star Sword art, I will definitely be stronger than an ordinary martial artist using the Flying Star Sword art." At this moment, Xiang Wuji said seriously, "Kid, I'll teach you the first 2 moves of the Flying Star Sword technique tonight. As for the remaining 7 moves, it will depend on your comprehension ability before I decide whether to teach them to you. You have to open your eyes wide and watch carefully. This old man will only display it once. Whether or not you can master it will depend on your talent and comprehension ability." Ji Tianqing immediately restrained his thoughts and did not dare to think about it anymore. He stared at Xiang Wuji with his eyes wide open, afraid that he would miss some moves in the dark. Xiang Wuji stood there with a serious expression for a moment. He secretly activated the true Yuan in his body and prepared to practice the Flying Star Sword art. An incomparably majestic true essence rushed through his body, and it actually emitted a thunderous rumbling sound. Obviously, its power was extremely terrifying. "Brat, watch carefully. First move, Thousand Feather Blade." Xiang Wuji suddenly roared and waved his hands, sending out 3 dark green sword lights. As his hands danced, he formed a sword seal and drew a mysterious arc in the air, and the 3 green sword lights also danced in the air. Swoosh swoosh swoosh. The 3 streaks of green sword light dispersed and launched an incomparably swift and fierce attack from different angles and directions. Although the 3 sword lights danced within 10 meters of him, each sword light's attack path and trajectory were different, leaving behind a trail of green light in the night. As Xiang Wuji's hands moved, the 3 sword lights attacked continuously in mid-air at the speed of lightning. All of a sudden, with Xiang Wuji as the center, a radius of 10 meters was illuminated by the dazzling sword aura, filled with crisscrossing green flowing light. In just 5 breaths, the 3 sword lights attacked from different angles and directions over 1,000 times. Ji Tianqing's eyes widened in shock, and his heart raced. He felt that this was unbelievable. In 5 breaths, the 3 sword lights attacked over 1,000 times. No wonder this move is called Thousand Feather Blade. No matter how strong the opponent is, he can't block over 1,000 attacks in 5 breaths. He will definitely be shredded into pieces by the sword lights. The power of this Thousand Feather Blade is too terrifying. The Flying Star Sword art is indeed powerful. At the same time, Xiang Wuji finished practicing the 1,000-feather blade. The 3 green sword lights flew back to him and quietly floated in the air. Xiang Wuji turned to Ji Tianqing and shouted, "Brat, did you see it clearly? I will give you 100 breaths to remember and analyze." Ji Tianqing didn't speak. He closed his eyes and silently recalled. Every movement and detail of Xiang Wuji's 1,000-feather blade appeared in his mind one by one. After a full 100 breaths, over 1,000 images appeared in his mind, and he finally remembered all the details of the 1,000-feather blade. Just as he opened his eyes and was about to speak, Xiang Wuji growled again. "Brat, look carefully. The second move, wind and thunder strike." Xiang Wuji waved his hands again. His index and middle fingers closed together to form a sword technique. He drew a mysterious path in front of him. The 3 green sword lights in front of him suddenly turned into 2 and became even bigger. They were at least 2 meters long. Swoosh, swoosh. The 2 huge sword auras flew out 10 meters away and slashed at the ground from mid-air, erupting with an incomparably terrifying power. At that moment, the 2 sword lights shone brightly and created a violent hurricane. The entire yard was filled with sand and pebbles. Boom! A deafening noise. The blinding light and the hurricane blended together. Like a shocking thunder, the sword lights slammed into the green stone floor. Instantly, a 3-meter-wide crater appeared on the blue stone floor, with gravel and dust flying everywhere. The terrifying power traveled into the ground and caused the entire yard to shake violently. It was as if there was an earthquake. In the blink of an eye, the 2 green sword lights flew back to Xiang Wuji and disappeared into his palms. He had finished practicing the second move, wind and thunder strike. Even though this move was simpler and more violent than the 1,000-feather blade, its power was even more terrifying. Ji Tianqing stared dumbfoundedly at the huge pit in the courtyard and the dust that filled the air. His heart was filled with shock. He silently fantasized about when he could reach such a level of power. One sword move could shake the earth. At this time, Xiang Wuji turned around and walked back under the eaves. Seeing his face full of shock and yearning, he said indifferently, "You're right. I don't want to destroy my own yard. I only used 10% of my power. Study it well. After 100 breaths, show it to me." Chapter 114. 10% of his power is already so terrifying. Ji Tianqing's expression changed as he became even more shocked. If the stinky old man uses all his power, wouldn't he be able to level the entire Greaton Palace in the blink of an eye? This is too terrifying. Just what realm has his strength reached? Origin Core Realm? Or the legendary Heaven Origin Realm? After a while, he finally calmed down. He did not dare to let his imagination run wild. He hurriedly closed his eyes to comprehend the wind and thunder strike. While the wind and thunder strike is not as complicated as the 1,000-feather blade, this sword technique focuses on the method of exerting power. Soon, 100 breaths passed. Xiang Wuji stood under the roof and looked calmly at Ji Tianqing. There was a hint of anticipation in his eyes. Ji Tianqing opened his eyes. He calmly walked to the middle of the yard and stood still. He circulated the vital essence in his body. Swish swish swish. 3 flashes of sword energy appeared in front of him. They gave off a dark gold light in the dark night. Ji Tianqing put his index and middle fingers together and formed a sword technique. He quickly waved his hands in a profound pattern to control the 3 flashes of sword energy. Swish swish swish. The sword chi made a sharp sound as it pierced through the air. It circled and danced in the air within 3 meters around him, attacking and assassinating from all directions and angles. His hands moved faster and faster, gradually leaving behind afterimages. The speed of the 3 flashes of sword energy also reached an extreme. They attacked as fast as lightning, and their angles and trajectories became more and more cunning. 10 breaths passed quickly. The 3 flashes of sword energy attacked more than 1,000 times. Ji Tianqing finished practicing the 1,000-feather blade. He had used too much vital essence and his face was slightly pale. He waved his hand and called the 3 flashes of sword energy back to his side. They floated in the air. While he used twice the time to control the sword energy to attack more than 1,000 times, he had already mastered the 1,000-feather blade. However, he had already grasped the embryonic form of the 1,000-feather blade. When he used this sword technique, it was already 60 to 70% similar. Even though his sword energy was still very weak and could not be compared to Xiang Wuji's azure sword energy. But in the future, when he was strong enough, he would be able to achieve the same effect and power as Xiang Wuji. At this moment, Xiang Wuji spoke calmly. "Kid, although you use twice the time and the power of your sword qi is somewhat weak, you have already learned the basics of this 1,000-feather blade. You managed to successfully execute the 1,000-feather blade just by watching me demonstrate it once, and you even managed to replicate it to a certain extent. As for your talent and comprehension, it's still passable." Although Xiang Wuji said that, he was actually very satisfied with Ji Tianqing. He knew very well that geniuses like Ji Tianqing, who could learn the 1,000-feather blade after only seeing it once, were rare in the Sky Pillar sect. Moreover, he had always been harsh with his words and rarely praised others. Ji Tianqing had already surpassed the majority of the Sky Pillar sect's disciples to receive his SOSO evaluation. Xiang Wuji raised his eyebrows and said expressionlessly, "All right, let's continue with the second move." The wind lightning strike seems simpler than the 1,000-feather blade, but it's actually much more profound and mysterious. Ji Tianqing also understood this point, so his expression was somewhat dignified. After taking a deep breath, he began to circulate his sword qi. Swish swish. The 3 dark golden sword qi turned into 2 and doubled in size from the size of a toothpick to the size of a dagger. Wind lightning strike. Ji Tianqing formed a sword seal with both hands and suddenly let out a low roar as he controlled the 2 sword qi to slash forward. Swish swish. The 2 sword qi flew 3 meters away, one on the left and one on the right, bursting with powerful energy as they slashed fiercely at the ground. Bang! With a dull sound, the dark golden sword qi mixed with the violent wind and struck the bluestone floor like a chopstick-sized lightning bolt. A half-meter-long crack appeared on the hard bluestone floor, and a few pieces of gravel flew out. After completing the wind lightning strike, Ji Tianqing recalled the 2 sword qi and put them back into his palms. Looking at the half-meter-long crack on the ground, he scratched his head awkwardly. After all, Xiang Wuji's wind lightning strike was extremely powerful, and it blasted a 3-meter-wide crater on the ground. On the other hand, his wind lightning strike was so weak that it only left a crack on the bluestone floor. The difference between the 2 of them was at least 10 times greater. The stinky old man's wind lightning strike was like a combination of wind and lightning. It caused the entire house to shake. The wind lightning he used was like the lightning in the sky, and the wind lightning I used was like a weak electric snake. I wonder how many years I will have to train hard to reach the stinky old man's level. Ji Tianqing sighed in his heart before he returned to the house and looked at Xiang Wuji anxiously. "Senior, look at the wind lightning strike I used just now. Did I learn it?" Xiang Wuji turned his head and stared at him. He sneered disdainfully, "Do you think you have learned it? It's all an appearance, but all an appearance. The wind lightning strike that I used was like the lightning in the sky, but the wind lightning strike that you used was like a fart." Ji Tianqing looked embarrassed. He could only smile embarrassedly. "Humph." Xiang Wuji snorted coldly, retracting his cold smile. Then, he casually said, "However, you can be considered to have learned the basics of the wind lightning strike. At least your fart is loud, unlike little Xian's grandfather." He learned it from me 3 times, but he can't even fart. Although Xiang Wuji always used farts to describe this sword technique, Ji Tianqing's attention was not on this question. Senior, who is Xian's grandfather? Of course it's the elder. Xiang Wuji replied instinctively, but he stopped halfway. He suddenly turned his head and stared at Ji Tianqing. He scolded angrily, "You little bastard, are you trying to trick me?" Cough cough. Definitely not. Ji Tianqing waved his hands and denied it. Alright, stop talking nonsense. Xiang Wuji frowned and warned in a deep voice, although you have learned the basics of these 2 sword techniques, you still need to practice hard in the future to increase their power. When you've mastered those 2 moves to the greater mastery realm, I'll teach you the other moves. Ji Tianqing hurriedly cupped his hands and bowed. He said sincerely, "Thank you senior for teaching me the sword techniques. I can't thank you enough." Xiang Wuji smiled at him and said in a mocking tone, "Hee, then how are you going to thank me? How about this, you leave the storm courtyard tomorrow and stay in my great peace palace. Every day, you will clean my courtyard and take care of the herbs." Before he finished speaking, Ji Tianqing's expression changed. He pointed at the sky above his head and hurriedly said to Xiang Wuji, "Senior, it's already dark. I still have matters to attend to, so I will leave first. Please rest early." After he finished speaking, he didn't care if Xiang Wuji agreed or not and ran away like a wisp of smoke. Xiang Wuji looked at his back and scolded in a joking manner, "You heartless little bastard. How many people can't get this job even in their dreams? You actually disdain it. If it wasn't for the fact that the sword energy you cultivate is similar to the Kenshin art, or even very likely, I wouldn't bother with you and waste my time with you." Chapter 115. When Ji Tianqing left the Grand Peace Palace, it was already 9 in the morning. Other than the few lights in the Grand Peace Palace, the entire mountain was shrouded in the darkness of night. It was quiet and eerie. Even though this was the last time he had returned. He had spent almost 2 hours practicing the flying star sword technique. But his heart was filled with excitement and anticipation. His footsteps were much lighter. 15 minutes later, he was walking on a small tree-lined path at the foot of the mountain. There was not a single person on the path. The surrounding forest was also as dark as ink. It was deathly silent. Suddenly, 2 cold lights lit up in the forest. They shot at Ji Tianqing's head and chest like lightning. Xiao. Those 2 cold lights were hidden weapons and throwing knives. They pierced through the night sky with a sharp sound. Ji Tianqing was pondering over the 2 sword techniques he had just learned. He was suddenly awakened by the sound and his expression changed. Damn it! Someone is ambushing me. He immediately exploded with a vast amount of true essence. He moved 3 meters to the side to avoid the attack of the 2 hidden weapons. The 2 hidden weapons and throwing knives flew in front of him. With 2 dong sounds, they nailed themselves into a large tree on the side of the road. The finger-long blade was completely embedded into the tree trunk. The handle was still violently vibrating. Clearly, these 2 hidden weapons and throwing knives contained a large amount of power. If they hit Ji Tianqing, they would definitely pierce 2 bloody holes. Ji Tianqing retreated to the forest on the side of the road. He hid behind a large tree that was as thick as a water bucket. Suddenly being ambushed, he was angry and puzzled. But he was still calm and did not lose his composure. He hid behind the large tree. His sharp eyes observed the forest in front of him, looking for the person who had attacked him. In the next moment, a black shadow charged out of the forest in front of him. That person was holding a treasure sword that emitted a cold light. He was charging straight at him. When he saw that black shadow, Ji Tianqing immediately frowned. His eyes flashed with cold killing intent. It's him. That night, he was the one who lured me out of the room and then framed me. Ji Tianqing instantly recognized him. This black-clothed warrior with a veil over his face was the black-clothed man from that night. Just in time. I want to see who's after me. He shouted in his heart as he secretly mobilized the true essence in his body, and a strong fighting intent burst out from his body. At the same time, the man in black rushed to the front of Ji Tianqing, less than 3 meters away. The black-clothed man leaped, jumping more than 3 meters high, waving his sword and thrusting out a dozen dazzling dark yellow sword auras, enveloping Ji Tianqing. Swish swish swish. Suddenly, the night sky around Ji Tianqing was illuminated by the sword light. Many branches and leaves were torn to shreds by the sharp sword qi. At the critical moment, he did not hesitate to use the flying star sword technique that he had just learned. Thousand Feather Blade. Ji Tianqing bellowed with a murderous aura. He suddenly shot out 3 chopstick-length dark golden sword qi towards the black-robed man. Ding 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 ding. The golden sword qi was as fast as lightning, and it clashed with the dozen or so sword projections, resulting in a series of crisp sword cries. In just a short time, the 3 golden sword qi had struck hundreds of times. It was so fast that people could not see the trajectory and route of the sword qi. The black-robed man's more than a dozen dark yellow sword projections were shattered by the sword qi on the spot, turning into little yellow light spots and dissipating. However, the power of the Thousand Feather Blade was not limited to this. The 3 golden sword qi were still attacking at a very fast speed. Swish swish swish. In the blink of an eye, the 3 sword qi had attacked hundreds of times. The black-robed man was obviously stunned for a moment, and he hurriedly waved his sword to resist. Ding ding dang dang. After a series of collision sounds, the black-robed man's chest and abdomen were stabbed dozens of times by the sword qi. His body trembled again and again, and he let out a painful muffled groan. He fell from the air to the grass and rolled a few times before he got up. The black clothes on his chest and abdomen had been shredded to pieces by the sword qi, revealing the golden soft armor he wore underneath. Fortunately, he had the protection of the golden soft armor. Otherwise, he would have been pierced into a sieve by the sword qi. The black-robed man angrily shouted in a low voice, and unwillingly waved his sword to attack again. However, Ji Tianqing controlled the 3 sword qi, and stabbed hundreds of times in a breath. A large number of golden sword shadows surrounded the black-robed man. Moreover, he controlled the sword qi to stab the black-robed man's arms, face, and legs, which were not protected by the soft armor. The black-robed man waved his sword to resist, and could only block the sword qi that was attacking his head. After another series of ding ding dang dang sounds, the black-robed man's arms and legs were pierced with more than a dozen bloody holes by the sword qi. He half knelt on the ground, holding his sword with both hands, and panted violently. Red blood flowed out from the more than a dozen wounds, sprinkling on the lush grass. At the same time, Ji Tianqing's Thousand Feather Blade also ended, and the 3 golden sword qi flew back to his side and floated. Who are you? Why do you want to assassinate me? He asked in a cold voice, and stepped closer to the black-robed man, exuding a strong murderous aura. The black-robed man did not say a word, and without hesitation, turned around and fled. His speed was as fast as an arrow, and in the blink of an eye, he entered the forest. Don't even think about escaping. Ji Tianqing quickly chased after him, and also entered the forest. However, the night was dark, and it was difficult to tell the direction in the forest. The black-robed man had the strength of a profound understanding cultivator, and he had cultivated a high level of qinggong. He was also very familiar with the terrain, and his speed in the forest was extremely fast. Ji Tianqing had only chased for 1,000 meters before he was shaken off by the black-robed man. Damn it! I let him escape again. In desperation, Ji Tianqing could only give up the chase, and unwillingly return to the tree-lined path. He returned to the place where he had been attacked, and took down the 2 concealed throwing knives that were nailed to the tree, and searched the nearby area. Unfortunately, other than the 2 concealed throwing knives, the black-robed man did not leave behind any clues. Ji Tianqing could only put away the 2 concealed throwing knives, and with a gloomy face, rushed back to the wind cloud courtyard. After returning to his residence, he did not even have the mood to eat dinner, and sat under the lamp, carefully examining the 2 throwing knives. However, the 2 throwing knives were only common concealed weapons, and did not have any identification, nor was there anything special about them. With just these 2 concealed throwing knives, Ji Tianqing could not find out the black-robed man's identity. He put away the throwing knives, and with a serious expression, he frowned and pondered. That black-robed man had the strength of a profound understanding cultivator, and he was very familiar with the sect's terrain, so he should be an inner disciple of the sect. He ambushed me midway, so he obviously knew my whereabouts. But other than Ji Ling and Lu Mingyang, who else wants to kill me? Luckily I had just learned the flying star sword art, or else I would not have been able to block the black-robed man's attack, and I would have most likely been assassinated by him tonight. But even if I had learned the flying star sword art, and could fight with a profound understanding cultivator, I did not cultivate a high-level qinggong, so I would not be able to catch up to that black-robed man. It looks like I need to quickly find a high-level qinggong to cultivate. The next time that black-robed man tries to assassinate me, I will be able to catch up to him, and find out his identity. Chapter 116. In the next few days, the black-clothed man didn't appear again. He was probably recuperating in secret. Ji Tianqing would sweep the floor of the Grand Peace Palace every day. He would also study the 1000 recipe set and learn about pill formulas and medicine. At night, he would focus on cultivating the flying star sword art and pondering the mysteries of the 1000 feather blade and wind lightning strike. In these few days, Xian Wuji didn't appear again. Ji Tianqing also didn't know what he was busy with. Ever since that evening when she met Lu Mingyang outside the gate, Xian hadn't gone to the Grand Peace Palace. Unknowingly, 5 days had passed. Today was the 2nd week of the Tempest Courtyard's small exam. Han Xiaofan wanted to test everyone's learning results. Early in the morning, the bell rang in the Tempest Courtyard's main hall. Ji Tianqing, Nie Hao, and the others all rushed to the main hall to accept Han Xiaofan's test. The content of this test was related to pill formulas and medicine. Han Xiaofan gave each of the 10 disciples a pill formula and had Du Wu place more than 40 sets of medicinal ingredients on the table. The pill formulas in everyone's hands had all been cut down. They were all missing 2 or 3 medicinal ingredients. Han Xiaofan's test was to have everyone carefully study the pill formulas in half an incense stick's time and make up for the missing medicinal ingredients. In the end, the 10 disciples all completed the task in half an incense stick's time and made up for the missing medicinal ingredients. After Han Xiaofan checked, he announced the results of the test. Ji Tianqing, Nie Hao, Ji Ling, Emo, Shi Jingcheng, and the others all completed the task without error. Only one disciple made a mistake and failed to complete the task. This disciple was reprimanded by Han Xiaofan and had a true elemental pill deducted from his monthly allowance. Every disciple of the sky-bearing sect received a certain amount of monthly allowance. This was a subsidy given by the sect to help the disciples increase their strength. Ordinary outer sect disciples only received 6 true elemental pills and 5 spirit fruits to increase their strength every month. As for the 10 genius disciples of the Tempest Courtyard, they received 10 true elemental pills and 8 spirit fruits every month. Ji Tianqing, Nie Hao, and the others had only been in the sect for half a month. They had to wait until the beginning of the next month to receive their monthly allowance. The disciple who did not complete the mission had his true elemental dan deducted just like that, which was also very distressing. After the assessment ended, Han Xiaofan announced everyone's mission for the next half a month. Now that you've recognized the medicinal herbs, you've also understood the pill formula and the prescription. In the next half a month, everyone will study the pill formulas of the spirit-nourishing pill, green jade pill, and heart-nourishing pill, and practice refining pills. There is a pill room in the outer sect that is specially provided for disciples to refine pills. Everyone can go there to practice refining pills. However, each of you will only have 3 sets of materials to refine pills, so you must understand them thoroughly and try to refine pills only when you are confident. At the end of this month, I will conduct a monthly test for all of you. At that time, you will be rewarded according to your performance. I can reveal one thing in advance. The top 3 in the monthly assessment will be rewarded, but the reward for the first place is the most generous. It will greatly affect your cultivation for the next 6 months. After speaking, Han Xiaofan had Du Wu distribute 3 sets of alchemy materials to each person. After that, Han Xiaofan left with Du Wu. All the disciples carried their bundles of medicinal herbs and walked out of the main hall one after another. Ji Tianqing and Nia Hao exchanged a few words, and the 2 of them were the last to walk out of the main hall. When they walked into the courtyard, they saw several other disciples gathered at the entrance of the Tempest courtyard. They seemed to be discussing something in low voices. He frowned and subconsciously muttered, "What are they doing?" Nia Hao glanced at the entrance and nodded. "Let's go take a look." The 2 of them stepped across the courtyard and walked towards the entrance. They saw a woman wearing a long white dress standing at the entrance. Although everyone could only see the woman's silhouette, they all revealed a stunned expression and their eyes revealed adoration. The woman in the white dress was like snow, and her graceful figure made people's hearts beat faster. Her beautiful cheeks were suffocating, and her long black hair hung down to her waist. She only stood quietly outside the entrance, but she had a kind of aloof and noble temperament that was aloof from the world. When the genius disciples of the Tempest courtyard saw her, they felt ashamed of their inferiority and did not dare to approach and disturb her. Several disciples gathered together and discussed in low voices with excited expressions on their faces. "What a beautiful woman! I'm not afraid of being laughed at, but this is the first time I've seen such a peerless beauty in my life." "Yes, I feel the same way. Such a peerless beauty with an otherworldly temperament, just like a fairy from the heavens." "Hee, you are too ignorant. This beauty in white is our senior sister, the chief disciple of our courtyard, Yun Yao." "Ah? She is Yun Yao? The #1 genius of the Tianshan region? Oh my God, I've heard of her reputation and deeds 2 years ago. I didn't expect to see her in person today. I'm so lucky. It's a pity that such a peerless beauty can only be seen from afar and cannot be profaned. Otherwise, I would have the courage to visit senior sister." Shi Jingcheng and Emo also gathered together. They looked at Yun Yao up and down with passionate eyes, whispering to each other. "I didn't expect senior sister Yun Yao to come to the outer courtyard and to our Tempest courtyard." "Yes. I don't know why senior sister came to the Tempest courtyard. It seems like she's here to look for someone." Sigh. "I don't know who is so lucky to be acquainted with senior sister and make her come to the Tempest courtyard to look for him. How good would it be if the person senior sister is looking for is me? Tomorrow, I will be famous in the courtyard. I don't know how many senior and junior brothers will be jealous of me." Just as everyone was talking, Yun Yao, who was standing at the entrance, suddenly turned her head and looked into the courtyard. Her cold expression immediately became gentle and she called out in a very pleasant voice, "Junior brother Tianqing, come out for a moment." Upon hearing this, all the disciples in the courtyard were dumbfounded. Everyone was shocked and looked at Ji Tianqing in disbelief. Their eyes were full of jealousy and envy. Ji Tianqing and Nia Hao walked side by side and approached the entrance. Seeing Yun Yao standing at the entrance, he guessed that the disciples must be talking about her. But he didn't expect that Yun Yao would come to look for him and even take the initiative to greet him. He was stunned for a moment before he walked to the entrance and stood in front of Yun Yao. Miss Yunyao. He nodded to Yunyao and was about to ask. Yunyao frowned and stared at him with a playful look. Ji Tianqing came to his senses and quickly changed his words. Senior sister, are you looking for me? Yes, Yunyao said calmly, I have something to say to you. Do you have time? Of course. Ji Tianqing nodded and agreed without hesitation. Yunyao nodded and turned to walk out. Come with me. When the disciples in the courtyard saw Ji Tianqing leave with Yunyao, they immediately showed expressions of envy and jealousy and whispered to each other again. A new month has arrived. Little he is here to ask for a few recommendation tickets. He asks his brothers to add this book to their bookshelves so that they can see the latest content every day. Chapter 117. Ji Tianqing followed Yunyao out of the storm courtyard. They were walking on a tree-lined path halfway up the mountain. This path was located deep in the forest. It was quiet and uninhabited, and very few people would pass by it. The two of them walked along the tree-lined path for 3 miles before standing under a 100-year-old tree and chatting. Yunyao calmly looked at Ji Tianqing and asked, You've been in the sect for half a month now. Have you adapted? Ji Tianqing smiled lightly and nodded. Thank you for your concern, eldest senior sister. I've already adapted to the rules of the sect and gotten used to life in the sect. Yunyao nodded and continued, I've heard junior sister Xian mention you before. She said you violated the sect's rules and were punished to sweep the floor of the Grand Peace Palace. Ji Tianqing was a little embarrassed and smiled embarrassedly. Yes, Deacon Han punished me to sweep the floor for a month. Fortunately, half a month has passed. Yunyao frowned slightly and said in a serious tone, the Grand Peace Palace is a place that ordinary people can't enter. Other than junior sister who can enter and leave freely, even I have to get the old man's permission to enter. Junior brother Tianqing, you must be careful when you're in the Grand Peace Palace. You must not anger that old man. Otherwise, even if I want to help you, it will be difficult. That old man's identity. Hearing this, Ji Tianqing couldn't help but smile bitterly. Senior sister, I seem to have offended that old man, and it wasn't a light offense. Yunyao frowned and a trace of worry flashed through her eyes. What did you do this time? Ji Tianqing didn't dare to look directly into her big clear eyes. He turned his head to look elsewhere and said with a bitter smile, I accidentally tore off his roof and destroyed the blue soul grass and azure spirit tree that he carefully cultivated. Yunyao didn't know whether to laugh or cry. She looked at Ji Tianqing with a complicated expression. After a long time, she shook her head and sighed, Good luck to you. In the entire Sky Pillar sect, only that old man has the jade soul grass and the azure spirit tree. In the past, when I wanted to ask for a jade soul grass, I had to beg Master to come forward and ask for it. It's not easy for you to stand in front of me alive. Ji Tianqing listened to Yunyao's helpless tone and looked at her worried face. His heart skipped a beat. Eldest senior sister, don't worry about me. I know what I'm doing. Besides, that old man doesn't seem to be as cruel as you said. Yunyao's beautiful eyes turned, glanced at him, and said in a strange tone, I'm not worried about you. I just think that it would be so pitiful if you were beaten to death by that old man at such a young age. Ji Tianqing was speechless. He didn't know how to respond to her. Moreover, he had always felt that Yunyao was a high and mighty holy fairy who was untainted by the mortal world. She was usually cold and proud. He didn't know why, but Yunyao didn't have that kind of cold and distant aura in front of him. He thought to himself, is there anything special about me? How can I get Yunyao's pleasant treatment and care? Just as he was letting his imagination run wild, a young man in white appeared on the tree-lined path and ran over quickly. The young man in white seemed to be looking for something. When he suddenly saw Yunyao's figure, he immediately sped up and ran over. Eldest senior sister, I've finally found you. Bai Wuchen looked like he was in a hurry as he quickly came to Yunyao's side. When he saw Ji Tianqing, he immediately frowned. Bai Wuchen glanced coldly at Ji Tianqing. He seemed a little unhappy. Yunyao's expression was indifferent. She asked calmly, "Junior brother Bai, are you looking for me?" Bai Wuchen retracted his gaze from Ji Tianqing and quickly smiled at Yunyao. Eldest senior sister, the sect master is back. He's in the sky-raising palace. He sent you a message asking you to meet him. Yunyao's expression softened. Master is back? Okay, I'll go to the sky-raising palace now. Then, she turned to look at Ji Tianqing and reminded him, "Junior brother Tianqing, you must remember what I said just now." "Of course, I won't dare to forget." Ji Tianqing cupped his fists and smiled. Yunyao nodded. Then, she turned and left with Bai Wuchen. Before leaving, Bai Wuchen turned to look at Ji Tianqing. His gaze was a little cold. Ji Tianqing's expression remained calm. No one could see any change in his expression. However, he could clearly see Bai Wuchen's expression and gaze. He already had a plan in mind. This Bai Wuchen. Since the first time I met him in Qingyun Kingdom, he seemed to have some prejudice against me. I wonder how I offended him. After standing under the tree for a while, he turned and left. After a quarter of an hour, Ji Tianqing returned to the storm courtyard. The few disciples had not returned to their rooms. They were still in the courtyard. They gathered in twos and threes and were still discussing something in low voices. Seeing Ji Tianqing return, the few disciples quieted down at the same time. They all looked at him with complicated expressions. Everyone tacitly kept quiet and watched him as he walked through the courtyard. It was not until he returned to his room that they continued to discuss. Their expressions became more and more interesting. Humph. I don't know what kind of luck that kid has. He actually got to know eldest senior sister. How despicable. Eldest senior sister is like a goddess. How could she be friends with him? Shi Jingcheng and Emo were so jealous that their eyes were almost red. Their hatred for Ji Tianqing deepened. The other two disciples gathered under the tree. Their faces were also filled with jealousy and indignation. No. We have to tell eldest senior sister about that kid stealing the spirit fruit. We can't let that despicable Ji Tianqing get close to eldest senior sister. Cough cough. Do you know eldest senior sister? Can you see her? Can you talk to her? The person who spoke earlier did not utter a word and retreated with an awkward expression. Ji Ling sat on the stone bench under the big banyan tree. He held an ancient book in his hand and pretended to be reading. Hearing the disciples' indignant discussion, he also sneered and interjected. He, back in Qingyun Kingdom, if it wasn't for eldest senior sister's help, that kid wouldn't even have the qualifications to participate in the entrance competition. When the other disciples heard that there was gossip, they hurried to Ji Ling's side and looked at him eagerly. Ji Ling, were you talking about Ji Tianqing? What's going on exactly? You should know about it, right? Hurry up and tell us. Don't keep us in suspense. Ji Ling seemed to like the feeling of being surrounded by everyone, like the moon surrounded by stars. The sneer on his face deepened. He glanced at Ji Tianqing's room. Then he lowered his voice and started to tell them about the entrance competition. The disciples gathered in a circle. They all listened attentively and discussed from time to time. Unknowingly, Ji Ling and the other disciples stood on the same side. They all hated Ji Tianqing. You're tuning in to the Xiaofan's Wuxia Tales YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.